Now 1:16 p.m. and a quorum of the board is present. The regular meeting of the State Board of Education is reconvened. Ms. Evans, are there individuals who wish to address the board during today's meeting?
Yes, there are people who have registered to provide public comment today, and I will review the rules. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes to address the board, and I will keep track of time. We will be strictly following the time limit so that everyone has an opportunity to speak. It is the practice of the board not to respond to comments during the public participation portion of the meeting. We will maintain an atmosphere of respect for all people. Any person disrespecting anyone by name or otherwise will be asked to cease. Public participation will occur in person and virtually. We will begin with those persons that are physically in the room with us today and then move to those in the queue online. First up today is a group that is already identified as a group, and so they'll come to the table together, and they're going to exercise the 10 minutes as a group per the bylaws. So this is Boris Rios, Consuelo Lopez, and Samantha Magdaleno. Thank you. And once you're comfortable and situated, you can begin your public comment period.
Good afternoon. My name is Boris Fernando Porras Rios. I'm a representative for the operating engineers. I am not here speaking on their behalf. I'm speaking about our culture and our people, about Chicano History Week. I was born and raised in Guatemala. I'm Native American, I'm Mayan, also Hispanic Latino. And to say, just to bring it into perspective, 179,000 people have moved to Michigan. 60% were Hispanics, Latino. And so Michigan was the first state to recognize Chicano History Week in the late 1960s. In the 1930s, 160,000 people were deported from Michigan. Most of them were American citizens through the Repatriation Act. In 1942, the Bracero Act was passed permitting millions of Mexican-American men to work in the United States. From 1962 through 1967, Mexican-American and Hispanic leaders lobbied elected officials, which led to the creation of Chicano History Week, in part to protect our rights, not just for recognition. Reason I've given you this information is because what is common knowledge to some of us is not to our youth. Our youth learning about their culture roots will empower them to ensure that it doesn't occur again and help them build a brighter future. At most meetings, I am the only one of me. Knowledge is power. What you do with that knowledge makes you powerful. In Miami, Florida, myself and my 13 brothers started a nonprofit program 15 years ago. We've already helped 17,500 kids. We're bringing that to Michigan. Here, we're going to use one of the 8 programs that builds that program in Miami, which is the Transition to Adulthood program, adding the trades to it, preparing them to go ahead and get into the workforce. A lot of them will be Hispanics, but it won't be just for Hispanic Latinos. It'll be for every child that is willing to participate in our program. One of the quotes I always use with our students in Miami was, sometimes it is those that we don't imagine much of that end up doing the unimaginable. I thank you for your time.
Hi, everybody. My name is Samantha Magdaleno, and I identify as Indigenous and Mexican. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I'm the executive director of One Michigan for Immigrant Rights, where we work with youth 13 years old to 24 years old. I'm also a JD candidate at MSU College of Law. And today I'm asking you to support SB 798. I really would like to see support on this bill because historically the United States has not treated the Mexican community as well as we deserve. If you go back into the 1930s, the Mexican Repatriation Act, in Detroit alone, we had 15,000 Mexicans that were citizens, and that number was brought down to 1,200. So that was a huge amount of people that were deported unconstitutionally. If we move on to that, we look into 2010 in Arizona, there was a ban on Mexican American studies only. And it wasn't until the year 2017 that the federal court finally overturned that rule. Looking recently, like I mentioned, I'm a law student. We have had the Latino Law Society suspended. This is the second time our club has been suspended. And when I've looked to staff and administration for help to revive this safe space for Latino students, we've been met with denials and nobody willing to help and advocate for us. So this just demonstrates that it's not just history, it's continued to happen in our country. And if you support this bill, this is a step into the right direction of showing our Mexican American students and our Latino students across the board that we are not second-rate citizens in this country, that we do contribute to this country and we're valued. This will help students that are in school, especially the over 6,000 Latino students that are registered in Detroit, with their mental health. Showing their heritage in school will encourage them to keep going. If you look at the statistics in Arizona, once they implemented that program, graduation rates started to soar. And not only did graduation rates started to soar, but the passing of the standardized test, which I don't really agree with, but that's a whole different conversation, those started to improve as well. Latino studies is not only for the Latino students, it's also for our non-Latino students. We claim that we're a melting pot, and we pride ourselves off of that, right? And we're always saying it. So to teach the background of how this country really started, how it began, and everybody that built it will be amazing. So again, I really hope you support, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Hola, everyone. My name is Consuelo Barber Lopez. I wear many hats. One is the commissioner of the Hispanic Latino Commission of Michigan, and the other as executive director of Amatla. And in that work, I dedicate service to our children who are trafficked, suffer from cyber crimes online, and I help them with resources with their parents, with law enforcement and hospitals. And so, with all of this being said, you have three different cultures sitting right in front of you. And probably when you looked at me, it's like, oh, no, not Latinidad at all, right? So, the importance, if you rarely become what you don't see. And here it is 20 years later after I graduated, yes, in 1844. And I still don't see that many people that look like me in leadership. So the bills will help to not only educate people of their identity and their history and their historical and cultural and political impact that we've made here in Michigan, it will uplift their leadership and say, yes, I can. I can be this, I can be that, I can be the teacher that took the time out and spoke to me when my father was deported for dropping me off to school. I can be anything that I want to. When we had the first Latin city council person, the impact that that made on our students, on what we can do, where we can go, is more powerful than anything. And those of us that are from immigrant backgrounds or African American, to be able to look on television, on the radio, to read a book, and to know this is me, this is who I can be, just to know that all of our students, regardless of their background, can feel secure and happy and feel more powerful to be American because I'm included. So, with that all being said, whatever that we can do to support the bills, because I don't know where they're at right now, but whatever work that we can do to support it, to make sure the quality and the sustainability of our academic success, that's what I'm here for. And especially when it comes to cyber crimes against our children, which is something that we do not really address at all. So, gracias.
Currently, there's two active unions teaching in Spanish. That would be the Carpenters Millwrights Union and LUNA. And so I've sat down at think tanks that have been placed by the governor, because every other union is looking and they're scavenging through the active operators, at least through the operating engineers. I know that for sure. They're scavenging to see who's bilingual, because we also want to start teaching. I'm also a member of MASI, which is Michigan Apprenticeship Steering Committee, Inc. And I was at the conference late last year, And so every trade and every entity that has anything to do with the trades is not only building and creating technology where you can play something hands-free in your ear that you could talk to contractors that only speak English, and another that you're talking your language and it translates. So we know that you learn more fluently to do the job that you're training for in your own language than you would having to translate every single time you're trying to learn something new. So teaching them more fluently will be quicker. But it's much easier for a contractor to say, do me a favor, go over there, Boris, and dig me a 9-foot hole, 20 by 20, than it is for me to learn and translate everything in my head on how to doing it. So that's one of the key things they're doing. The president of Caterpillar himself, the president of Caterpillar, Michigan, told me himself that he had a few guys from West Africa, from the Congo, come up. I think it was about 8 of them. And he said he had never seen anyone build one of their engines with their eyes closed like they did. The only problem was the language barrier. So that's exactly why everybody knows the work ethic of immigrants that have come to this country from the late 1800s up until now. So this is something that Michigan wants to pursue because they want to be first in a lot of things, and that's why they were the first state to implement Chicano History Week. I was part of planning and executing a 3-city tour with director Brandon Maxwell of the documentary American Homeboy. He's winning awards across the country at the moment. And so it's about Chicano, Pachuco, and Cholo culture. So he went back in time and restored footage of interviews using AI. And we showed it in 3 cities. We showed it in Flint, Lansing, and Detroit. Detroit being the grand finale just 2 Saturdays ago, I believe. And in that area, we had over 500 people attend. It was a big event. We still have one more showing under contract in Grand Rapids. We had limited resources, we had limited funding, and we had a lot of people not thinking we could do it. We pulled it off beautifully with live art, music. People were dancing. I brought out flags from different countries. We noticed that if you visualize yourself being united, you feel united. So I brought flags from 8 different countries, and we saw a few people walk up to their own flags and start dancing the music from their country and take pictures with them so they feel included. We would love your support to go ahead and have this be curriculum, if it could, being shown in schools because it is a teachable moment for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Gracias.
Next person for public comment is Alan Wisniewski.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, whenever you're ready. And
I've got a handout here for all of you. And while we're passing those around, I'd like to introduce a couple members of my team that are here with me today. We've got Tim Easterwood, our CEO and founder. Tim has spent his career at Ford Motor Company and then has built and grown and sold several successful startups in the automotive industry. Also with me is Jill Caniglio-Kirk, also a storied career in the automotive industry, and most recently at Lordstown Motors, a EV manufacturing company focused on fleet trucks.
whenever you're ready.
So my name is Alan Wisniewski. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at BizFleets. Also started my career at Ford Motor Company, live in Milford, Michigan, and I'm very excited to talk to you about this program that we built today. So we're here today to talk about, or on the recommendation of Senator McCann and Senator Anthony, who learned about our fleet management company and all the benefits that it can provide to the state of Michigan and Michigan's schools. So first, I want to give a little bit of a background on BizFleets. We are a fleet management company focused on electric vehicle adoption for public entities. And our team is very well connected at automotive manufacturers across the country, and also with all of the leading school bus manufacturers that will be a part of this program. So over the course of the last 12 months, we have been meeting with school district leaders from across the state of Michigan to put together this program that we are calling the My E-Fleet program. So the My E-Fleet program will deliver a zero-cost lease of an electric school bus and an electric vehicle charger installed at no cost to the school districts for all 800 school districts across the state of Michigan using funding that's already been appropriated to the Michigan Department of Ed. This program over the course of the last year has received bipartisan support throughout the House or in the House and Senate, and this BizFleets team is Michigan-based with all Michigan-based employees. And if you look at number 3 on the sheet here, this is the true impact that this program will have on the state. Today, there are 17 electric school buses on the ground after federal funding being available for over 2 years. This program, the My eFleet program, will add over 1,000 vehicles to this initiative or to Michigan schools in a matter of 12 months, serving all 800 school districts across the state. Additionally, BizFleets was awarded the University of Michigan contract to manage their fleet transition from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. And we are currently doing that for them in their fleet of 1,000 vehicles. This entire program is powered by the impressive technology system that we have built. Now, we understand that schools can choose exactly who they want to work with to find the right providers for these electric vehicles, but we've built a very impressive and industry-leading system to help them with this process. We will manage everything from the awareness program that makes sure that every school district is aware of this program and the available vehicles to them, and the process of going through the ordering process, customization process, only takes about 5 minutes for the school districts to get through, which is far more streamlined than any government grant process they would have to do on their own. So to summarize the program in 3 points, we will put this funding to use quickly and rapidly with a statewide program. We will make Michigan a model state for the rest of the country to emulate their electric school bus programs on, and we will bring in additional government funds, federal funds for Michigan to bring in more electric school buses and a better infrastructure system in the years to come.
Thank you so
for your
much.
time.
Okay, we will now pivot to those that are online. Hello, caller, can you hear me? Hello, caller? Hello? Hello, caller, can you hear me? Yeah. Can you please state your name and where you're calling from?
Sure, it's Pam Benstone from Marysville, Michigan.
Very good. Whenever you're ready, you may begin your 3 minutes of public comment.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I am a homeschool parent of 5 children, high school, a middle school, and 3 elementary schools. My children were part of the public school system until 2.5 years ago, when my husband and I pulled them to our district's response to COVID during the lockdowns and after, the curriculum, social issues that were being imposed on the students, and the administration's blatant disregard for parents' concerns and involvement in their children's education. Many of the issues I just mentioned are also the shared views and reactions of many of the members of this board. Therefore, this is not a system we want our children in or governed by. Urging the legislation to require any student, especially homeschool students, to register with the state so that MDE can monitor them if stepping out of your lane. According to Michigan.gov, your role as the state board of education is to manage the state's
public K-12 education. We do not fall under your purview. I'd like to share some facts that you may be unaware of. Homeschoolers are diverse, score substantially higher on standardized tests than public school students on average, receive the same academic boost at all ability levels, are consistently and equitably educated as public school students, are well socialized, have a lower child abuse rate than the national average, and regulation does not help homeschooled students. This information with additional links can be found at homeschoolingbackgrounder.com. Please do not paint this resolution as the need to protect Michigan students, especially as the claims regarding students not in the public school system made in Dr. Race's resolution are unfounded. I would like to know what resources were used, if applicable, for that information. But again, that is not your job, at least not for those not enrolled in the public school system. Let's call this what it is, grasping at the loss of the control the government has on the education of children to what the government wants and not what is actually best for the child. Enrollment in the public school system is down. You are losing funding. This problem will not be corrected by monitoring and regulating the students who are not part of that system. The issue lies within the system. As I wrote this, a Bible passage came to mind. You do notice a splinter in your brother's eye, but do not perceive the wooden beam in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me remove that splinter from your eye, while the wooden beam is in your eye? You hypocrite, remove the wooden beam from your eye first. Then you will see clearly to remove the splinter from your brother's eye. That's from Matthew 7. Thank you, Mrs. Snyder and Mr. McMillan, for continuing to fight for the rights of parents to be part of and in charge of their children's education, even though it is an uphill battle most of the time. God bless each member of this board, and you all have my continued prayers. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hello?
Hello, caller, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Thank you. If you could please state your name and where you're calling from, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Taylor from Macomb.
Thank you.
So I just, first of all, yeah,
Go for it. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
okay. First of all, I just want to pray for all of you. I want to pray that your eyes, your mind, and your soul will be open to hear the words that are spoken to you by homeschool families all across the state of Michigan. And just people in general. When you're talking with people, just be open to hear their words instead of already having an agenda that you want pushed. I really implore you to open your mind and listen to them rather than do what makes you feel good. Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. What that scripture doesn't say is, government, you decide what a child should be taught. The Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment protects the fundamental right of the parents to direct the care, the upbringing, and the education of their child or children. Did you hear the word government in there, or Michigan State School Board, or any state school board? I didn't. Dr. Rice, the public schools are failing at an alarming rate, and that is a direct result of what is being done at the public school level. Is there any accountability to show children's growth? Oh no, that percentage was decreased by the state. How does that push the child harder or challenge them? How does that make the teacher challenge him or herself to do better? We can literally look at many policies and programs brought on by the board that have been a failure. But the biggest one I have seen is the waste of money for the school lunches. I saw that myself. Do you know how much food is being thrown away? The Board of Education has failed the kids in the public school, which is why parents have been pulling them at huge rates. Truly understand that before you want to take any new initiative. You want the money back in the schools, get back to the basics of learning and get the data about what is working and what isn't. Don't just throw away money and you'll get people back in the schools. The best teacher for a child is their parent, and the government doesn't need to have any say in that. And if you want to bring up abuse of kids, let's talk about the abuse happening in the public schools. And let's fix that before you look into anyone's home. I'm praying for all of you. And if you are sick, you probably should stay home because masks, unfortunately, do not stop aerosolized virus. Please make sure to educate yourself about these and many other things by doing the research necessary. Thank you, and I hope you have all a wonderful day.
Thank you. Mike, are there any other callers who have pre-registered for public comment today?
There are no more callers.
Thank you. This concludes public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Mr. Flaminio, Ms. Cook. It is 1:40 board. We're at the approval of State Board of Education minutes. Could I please have a motion to approve the minutes?
Actually, can I? Yeah, I'd like to, on page 11, section 9, it said Mr. McMillan mentioned that private school funding is less than half of public school funding. He asked about MyLeap and wanted to advocate for the Attorney General to decide on the legality of implementing MyLeap. Mr. McMillan would like the Attorney General to ensure that nothing is being taken away from MDE constitutionally. The last part's fine.
McMillan, would you mind if we actually made a motion and
seconded it
before we discuss it?
I was going to make a motion to approve the minutes but include Mr. McMillan mentioned that per pupil private school funding is less than half of public school funding. If we could make a motion to approve minutes with those two words in there.
Let's reestablish some order. If I could have a motion to move the minutes as presented to the board.
So,
Moved by Mr. Bullock, seconded by Dr. Pritchett. Discussion to you, Mr. McMillan.
I just, that sentence about Mr. McMillan mentioned that private school funding is less than half of public school funding. I mean, you know, I think that what I said clearly was that per pupil private school
Very
funding.
good. Does anybody have a problem with Mr. McMillan's proposed amendment to the meeting minutes? The chair does not. Does any other board member have any problems with it? Beautiful. The motion is to approve the minutes as lightly amended by Mr. McMillan's suggestion. Are there any other discussion points? Hearing none, we could have a roll call vote, please.
Bullock?
yes.
Lipton?
Yes.
McMillan?
Yes.
Pritchett?
Yes.
Pugh?
Yes.
Robinson?
Yes.
Snyder?
Pass.
And Tilly.
Yes.
Motion carries.
May I please have a motion to approve the minutes of the regular and committee, to approve the legislative committee meeting minutes of February 1, 2024?
So move.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second motion from Dr. Pritchett, a second from Ms. Tilly. Any discussion associated therewith?
Can I just
Please,
ask,
Mr. McMillan.
there is a recording of that available?
There is a recording, yes.
Thank you.
And I believe it was sent.
Yep.
Yep, okay, very good. Any other discussion? Hearing none, if we could have a roll call vote, please.
Bullock?
Yes.
Lipton?
Yes.
McMillan?
Yes.
Pritchett?
Yes.
Pugh?
Yes.
Robinson?
Yes.
Snyder?
Pass.
And Tilly.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Very good, thank you very much, Board. State Board President, Dr. Pamela Pugh, your report.
So, just a couple, one of the visits that I made was with MDE staff to Flint, and was with it was a visit by the Deputy Undersecretary Dean, who was here visiting the state of Michigan, stopped by Flint, Michigan, as well as Dr. Rice, you may mention some of the other places. Undersecretary Dean is a University of Michigan grad, I will add. But stopped by the Flint Fresh Food Hub, and it was good to be with Dr. Golzinski and Melanie and others, and just really looking at how the Flint Fresh Food Hub has taken off. I was there working in Flint when it first opened, and to see how the department has remained a part of that staple in the community. And then to really highlight the USDA programs, as well as programs here within the state that are helping families as well as farmers, so business owners, through providing healthy, fresh food. So that was a pleasure, and I was really happy to be a part of that. This is Black History Month, and we also heard that it is Chicano History Week. So it is a great opportunity for us to all learn more about Americans who have contributed so much to this country. The other piece that I will probably just read, and we started off this morning, and we know that today marks the 1-year anniversary of the tragic mass shooting at Michigan State University. And just want to say that as we remember the lives lost, their families, and the countless others that have been affected, we are reminded of our responsibility to foster a safe educational environment for all. It is crucial to reflect not only on the profound loss and sorrow experienced, but also on the broader implications of gun violence as a public health crisis. And it is imperative that we continue advocating for and implementing evidence-based policies and practices aimed at preventing gun violence. This includes supporting legislation that addresses the root causes of gun violence, enhancing mental health services, and ensuring that schools have the necessary resources to implement effective safety measures. We know that together We can honor the memory of those we've lost by working tirelessly to prevent future tragedies and build a more secure and supportive educational environment for all students. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Madam President. 146, report of the State Superintendent. I want to thank Kelly Siciliano Carter, the Director of the Office of Strategic Planning and Implementation, for her work in transition to lead the Office of Public and Governmental Affairs. Additionally, I'm pleased to announce that Bob Wheaton will be joining the department soon in the role of OPCA Director. Bob is a longtime journalist who has served for more than a decade in communications roles with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and before that, the Michigan Department of Human Services. We welcome Bob to the department beginning March 4th. Black History Month and Diversity in Literacy. After the writing of the department's Equity and Literacy Guidance document, we produced 2 calendars of Black authors and their literacy works during Black History Month. For the 2024 calendar, board members, each day there's a lesson shared by a Michigan educator for other educators related to Black history. Lessons cross grade levels and content areas and include connections to Michigan standards. Additionally, the educator shares a brief statement of why he, she, they teach Black history. There's an emphasis that these lessons and texts are great resources all year long and particularly worth lifting up when we celebrate Black History Month. Last year's calendar featured literary works by Black authors that were submitted by Michigan Teachers of the Year, Regional Teachers of the Year, and MDE educators. The calendar shared favorite quotes by the authors and ideas for use in the classroom. Additionally, as you likely recall, members of the Student Advisory Council shared their recommended books through video interviews. In 2021, to showcase African American authors and their literary works, MDE and the Library of Michigan curated the Black History Month calendar with recommendations by educators for educators. Calendar included how educators incorporated a given work in their classrooms, along with identifying the work's genre and awards. Over the course of the last several years, the through line connecting each year's calendar and the department's vision for equity and literacy is the work of Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, who famously wrote about the power of children seeing themselves, mirrors, and others, windows, in their writing, and being able to enter others' worlds through the writing as well. Sliding glass doors, so mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. It's beautiful, evocative imagery, and unsurprising that someone with Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop's background and empathy would develop these sort of metaphors. Thanks to Dr. Renee Garcia, Dr. Jen Saylor, and other department staff for their work on this important effort. MDE and MyLeap. Last month, I provided a brief update on the transition of the Office of Great Start to MyLeap. Several MDE staff members, led by Deputy Superintendent Dr. Michelle Harmala, continue to work on the transition and on the processing of grants and a variety of financial transactions. While some of this work will continue until the end of the federal fiscal year, and some will continue indefinitely, in partnership with MyLeap, we have submitted the necessary paperwork in collaboration with MyLeap to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services that changes the lead agency status for the Head Start Collaborative Office and the Preschool Developmental Grant, Birth to 5 grant program. We continue to work on the transition of larger grant programs consistent with the governor's executive order, these being the 21st Century Community Learning Centers, IDEA Part C, which services infants and toddlers with disabilities, and IDEA Part B, which services children ages 3 to 5 with disabilities. Our teams meet regularly with our federal partners at USDHHS and USDOE for support and the technical assistance necessary to ensure administration and oversight of these programs and services, and that they proceed without interruption to students and staff in local school districts. This is critical that students and staff not be adversely affected by this transition in any way, shape, or form. And finally, a note on educating all children. Every child in Michigan, without exception, has the right to be educated somewhere. MDE supports the right of parents to choose the most appropriate educational setting for children, whether it be public, traditional or charter, private, parochial, or homeschool. Having a record of all children enrolled in these 4 categories would allow a clearer understanding of the children not currently enrolled in any learning environment. There's a history in Michigan and across the nation that some children do not receive any education, which is unacceptable. Currently, Michigan is only one of only 11 states in the nation that doesn't require some measure of notification of homeschooled children. Let's work together to ensure that every Michigan child has an identified educational setting, public, private, parochial, or homeschool. And finally, board, as you are aware, the governor released to the state legislature her fiscal year 25 executive budget recommendation last Wednesday. Dr. Diane Golzinski, our Deputy Superintendent for Finance and Operations, will share a brief presentation on the State School Aid Act recommendations, and I'll follow with a few words about the department's budget, voice permitting. Dr. Golzinski, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, board. It's great to be with you. Thank you, Dr. Rice. As Dr. Rice said, I will be providing a brief first glance overview of the governor's executive budget recommendation. We will start with the State School Aid Act for fiscal year 25. The governor is recommending a 2.5% increase, a $241 increase, which brings us to $9,849 per pupil, and a 80% of the foundation allowance for cyber schools, which would have cyber schools at $7,879. For rural and isolated, at-risk, and bilingual education, a 2.5% increase for all 3 of those categoricals. Special Education Foundation would increase 4.7%, which is $23.2 million. And the special education millage equalization would have a new formula to better equalize the impact of special education costs on districts, providing a $50 million increase to reduce the gap between the available funding and the required costs on districts. There would be a new weighted formula, a new weighted funding opportunity for high poverty students. This is section 25M. This would be a $90 million competitive grant for districts and intermediate districts to support academic, social, emotional, and physical needs of income eligible students. MDE would have to provide guidance to districts and ISDs on what those eligible expenses were, or expenses would be. Consolidation and infrastructure, no additional funding here, but a boilerplate change that the department advocated for. This would allow for $25 million to be allocated on an emergency basis in the event that a district had an infrastructure emergency. Think of a boiler going down, a hole in the roof, that type of thing. It would require a request by the state superintendent and review by Treasury and the state budget office before the funds may be used for that purpose. Our Great Start Readiness Program, moving now to Goal 1. The Great Start Readiness Program per pupil allocation would rise to $10,342, which is 5% higher than the proposed per pupil target foundation allowance, which would allow us to serve an additional 6,800 children statewide. In addition, some GSRP boilerplate changes removing the income limits on GSRP eligibility. That makes every child who is age eligible able to participate in GSRP. It also removes the requirement that tuition be charged for families with a particular family household income level. Also under Goal 1, a $1 million increase for early on and a subsequent $1 million increase for early childhood block grants. Moving now to Goal 2, improve early literacy. Literacy coaches, under this proposal, $86.2 million, which is a $3.2 million increase. MDE would be required to assure that each ISD is eligible to receive at least 3 early literacy coaches, and the ISDs must provide MDE the contact information for all of those literacy coaches. In addition, under subsection 10, letters would not be the sole recipient of the funds under the proposal. Instead, MDE must determine a list of eligible approved providers for the professional development. And then there's another $150 million for My Kids Back on Track, which you may remember was not in the FY24 budget. And also under Goal 2, 2 new sections, both administered by MyLeap. Section 31M creates literacy supports. This is a committee for literacy achievement. This committee is encouraged to work with our partners at Mary. MyLeap would be required to determine the size, the timeline, and the benchmarks of that committee. And that committee will evaluate literacy PD and rank the literacy curricula that districts use. And districts may then apply for funding in an amount determined by MyLeap based on the ranking of that curricula. Also, Section 35N, which creates the competitive read competition for $10 million. MyLeap and the Literacy Committee from 35M will establish the structure of that competition. The goal is to foster district-led innovations in literacy instruction grounded in the science of reading, provide the state with insights into successful practices, and improve student outcomes in literacy. Goal 3, improve the health, safety, and wellness of all learners. The governor is proposing to continue the Michigan School Meals Program funding at $200 million. This is a $40 million increase from fiscal year 24 due to the increased numbers of participation over what was expected. $170 million would come from the State School Aid Fund and $30 million from the School Meals Reserve Fund. The executive recommendation also includes a fiscal year 24 supplemental from the School Meals Reserve Fund to offset the current year costs. For Section 31AA, these are the mental health and school safety payments, the per pupil payments. The recommendation is for $300 million. That would remove the funding for non-public schools, and it would shift 50% of that, or $150 million, from one-time to ongoing funding. Under Goal 7, increasing the number of certified teachers in areas of shortage. You heard this morning about the amazing Grow Your Own programs. Another $50 million in new Grow Your Own funding is being proposed, as well as $50 million for the mentoring and induction programs. It's important to recognize under 27H, this is in addition to the $50 million that was in the FY24 budget. Under Goal 4, a section called 61V, $20 million for a new key industry pilot program. This would connect high school seniors with local key industries and trade associations for on-the-job training and also potential after graduation employment opportunities. Under Goal 6, $30 million increase for a total of $40 million for the FAFSA completion challenge. And then finally, you may have heard about the MIPSR's savings in the news. The MIPSR's has annual contributions that are governed by Public Act 300 of 1980. This is the Public School Employees Retirement Act. This law includes a floor provision that requires that annual contributions for pensions in the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, or UAAL, which may be easier to say, and other post-employment benefits will be no less than the prior year until each respective portion is 100% fully funded. Based on the most recent valuation of system assets in 2022, it was determined that this system was over 99% funded, and it is anticipated that the subsequent valuations will show this system to be over 100% funded. So, with it being fully funded, the floor provision no longer needs to apply for FY25. So as outlined in the governor's executive recommendation, that reduces the MIPSR's contribution of $670 million, allowing for that funding to support the 5% increase in certain categoricals, the shifting of some of that mental health and school safety funding to be ongoing rather than one time, the reducing of the district shares to the MIPSR's contribution, the Michigan School Meals Program moving from one time to ongoing, creating a more equitable special education formula, and lifting that GSRP income barrier, allowing for more families to enroll their children in free kindergarten.
Thank you, Dr. Golzinski. Board, with respect to the MDE budget in the governor's executive recommendation, for context, you should know for at least a decade, MDE has been responsible for approximately 20% of the state's budget, with approximately 1% of the state's workforce. For example, in the fiscal year 23 budget, prior to the advent of MyLeap, MDE was responsible for the vast majority of the State School Aid Act, just shy of $20 billion, or 23% of the state's total budget. At the same time, it had approximately 1% of the state's workforce. MDE's department budget for fiscal year 24 is $647 million. The proposed fiscal year 25 department budget is $163 million. The significant MDE budget reductions are related to the following. One, a $414.5 million transfer in federal child care payments that go to child care providers on behalf of parents. This is a function of the child care arm of what used to be the Office of Great Start in the Michigan Department of Education, now part of MyLeap, and that those transfer payments moved from fiscal year 24 into the fiscal year 25 MyLeap budget. Transfer of $15.7 million to fund 77 Office of Great Start staff now in MyLeap, and then the removal of $55 million in MDE one-time appropriations. The vast majority of this, board, is associated with $40 million for Michigan School for the Deaf new dormitory. So those three elements make up the vast majority of the change. The department's budget has always been somewhat unusual. It has been overrepresented relative to responsibility by the child care payments, which are federal dollars through the department out to child care providers. And with the change to MyLeap would move to MyLeap. So there's a disproportionately large budget impact to the movement of early childhood from MDE to MyLeap. The budget impact at approximately 75% is quite a bit more than is the FTE impact at a little bit over 10%. It's quite a bit more than the responsibility impact which is predominantly associated with early childhood education, at least with respect to MDE in Executive Order 2023-6. I say at least with respect to MDE with respect to the executive order because the executive order affects 7 departments and the formation of my LEAP affects 4 departments. It affects Treasury, LEO, Labor and Economic Opportunity, LARA, Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, and MDE. With respect to the governor's executive budget recommendation, there are suggestions or recommendations for the following additions to the department's budget. $500,000 to FTEs for summer EBT food benefits to feed children in the summer. $500,000 to FTEs to expand our comprehensive mental health system efforts. $350,000 to FTEs for career and technical education administration. $520,000 to FTEs for grants management administration. School infrastructure and consolidation under the governor's executive rec would receive 2 FTEs, $750,000 for that new function. These are all elements that the department recommended in the budget process to the state budget office and by extension to the governor. And finally, for the poet laureate, of movement from a one-time investment of $100,000 to ongoing funding for the poet laureate. In sum, board, MDE's fiscal year 24 budget has 638.5 FTEs in it. The executive recommendation would have it move to 572.5 FTEs. That reduction of 66 FTEs is the movement of 77 FTEs to my LEAP, offset by the 11 FTE addition proposed for the department. For that, in a nutshell, primarily from Dr. Diane Golzinski and her ubiquitous special assistant, Ross Fort, that presentation, in a nutshell, is the effort associated with education in the fiscal year 25 executive budget recommendation. And we're open to questions. Dr. Golzinski will handle all the challenging ones. Right. Please.
So every month since December and maybe before then, I've been asking, I think about every month, that I've been asking you to tell us when that line is crossed. The Attorney General said that my LEAP, when we asked, she said not yet, or nothing unconstitutional that she could see has occurred yet. And the discussion around the table that I believe you were indicating was that no FTEs have been moved. Nothing has been happening back in December, or maybe it was even before that, after the announcement. Certainly in December you said that. So I'm seeing FTEs moving. Has that line been crossed now?
Okay, I don't recall saying anything about a line changing with FTEs moving. The executive order in July called for the effectuation of this new department effective December 1st. And on December 1st, there was in fact a movement. There was movement of staff, there was movement of responsibility, there was, in a fashion, movement of budget. That's all part of part and parcel of what took place in July, part and parcel of what the AG was weighing in on when we asked the AG for a constitutional opinion.
So is there any possible movement, like could she issue another, or could another movement, a supplemental or something come across that moves more FTEs? Is there any point where you're going to say, okay, wait, there could be, in your mind, because I think in my mind it has crossed, but in your mind, I'm asking, is there any movement, any other additional movement that could occur that you would say this is a line crossed, that this has become unconstitutional? Is there any, or could we get to 0 at MDE and you'd be fine with that and you'd see no problem? Is there a line there?
Okay, well, let's be clear, okay? I mean, since we're drawing lines, let's draw them clearly, okay? I'm not a lawyer, you aren't either. I'm not weighing in on the constitutionality. I expect the Attorney General to do so, and the Attorney General has done so. So in terms of
Temporarily.
With respect, it's the AG's responsibility to weigh in on constitutionality. Of the three of us, only the AG has a law degree. Only the AG is the top law enforcement.
In my opinion, it's crossed. In your opinion, could there be any line? I'm not saying I'm not asking for a legal opinion. I'm saying, do you think it can get to 0 and you'd still be saying there's no line crossed?
It's not possible.
So there is a line.
There is a line, yes. And I would say,
77 is not it. Is 78 it? Would 1 more? Would 10 more? I want to know your line. I think it's crossed.
Oh, it's crossed, but not with respect to what you're saying. There are a few lines here. One is about decorum in a board meeting. The second is about constitutionality. And the third is about policy. With respect to policy, I'm in disagreement with the establishment of the new department. It's been very clear. But with respect to constitutionality, I leave that to the AG to make that determination. That's her role. It's her decision-making. And I don't think it is distillable to a number of FTE. It's really a function of responsibilities. And I think ultimately any sort of a constitutional analysis of this would distill to responsibilities rather than the number of FTEs associated with doing it. I think the department has historically been, at least in recent incarnation, the last couple of decades, I think that the department has been understaffed relative to its responsibilities constitutionally and statutorily. But the level of FTE is not per se an indication of constitutionality or lack thereof. It's the responsibilities in my view. Please.
I have questions. I'm going to try to get them out and thoughts. I guess, let me just start with, so will the School for the Deaf still fall under the State Board of Education's purview? So it will just be, I don't know what page that was on. What resources are going over to my leap?
So if you recall, right. So my leap, the July 12th executive order, July 11th, released July 12th executive order, has my leap with 3 offices: an office of early childhood education, an office of higher education, and an office of educational partnerships. The office of early childhood education is a function of 2 things. One, it's primarily a function, at least in my head, of our Office of Great Start, the MDE's former Office of Great Start. So it's Head Start, Great Start Readiness Program, Early Childhood Development, Child Care, the PDBG 5 grant, Birth to 5 grant, federal grant. And then finally, the out-of-school time learning programs. That's the Office of Great Start. And that is primarily what is early childhood education in my leap. Now, there's a riff to this. And the riff is that Laura sent over its licensing and regulatory folk, child care licensing and regulatory folk. So people who license child care centers, people who license preschool rooms in local school districts and in community-based organizations, all of those people came over from Laura into my leap to be part of this early childhood office.
So going back to the question of the Michigan School for the Deaf dormitory, so we will still be responsible we still own the Michigan School for the Deaf.
We are still responsible for the Michigan School for the Deaf. Yes, ma'am.
It's just that we will $55 million in MDEs that's appropriated to us will now.
Let me explain that, because it's a smidge misleading. So there was $40 million in last year's budget for a new dormitory for MSD. It's a one-time. So, you know, it's a lump in one budget. The next year's budget, it's a goose egg. It's a zero. It doesn't mean that we're not responsible for it anymore. It's just you only fund the one-time once.
Okay, so this has nothing to do with my leap.
It's nothing to do with functions, no.
So just making sure that you're only, what's written here, this doesn't fall under this isn't going over my leap responsibility. It's just that it's a one-time.
Correct.
You're noting that it's documenting that it's a one-time fund.
I am.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to get clarity on that.
It just helps explain the delta, the difference between fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25 budget. Yeah.
But we're still responsible for whatever happens with the dormitory.
Very much.
Okay. All right. Then let me see what I have here. I have page 12. So the 77 FTEs, those are all existing FTEs. Those are existing FTEs that are moving over. There's no new FTEs. They're all the FTEs that moved over. Okay. Then the flow through. So then we have absolutely no responsibility for anything that has to do with Office of Great Start or early childhood programming.
So I would say not. I would say there are at least two exceptions to that rule. I think we very much have the right and arguably the responsibility to weigh in on early childhood education, notwithstanding the fact that there are some people who don't believe that it's a proper function of state government, number one. And number two, we remain very much fiscally involved with the administration of some of those programs. In some cases, on a temporary basis, in some cases on a short-term basis, in some cases on an indefinite basis, depending upon the relationship depending upon the direction of the federal office responsible for each of those early childhood programs. So, for example, Head Start, federal Head Start, which is run by Human Services in the federal government, only requires a change of name to change the direction of administration. And Head Start is agnostic as to whether it's the state education agency or the state Department of Health and Human Services or the Department of Human Services or a MyLeap runs it, doesn't care. There are other federal programs for which it is a requirement that the SEA be responsible in some form or fashion. That's correct. That is us. That's exactly right.
MDE.
Yes, ma'am. And so there can be a movement in terms of state organizational structure, but from the Fed's perspective, in certain cases, 21st century community learning center programs being one of them, from the Fed's perspective, we're still the entity that they are going to hold responsible. So there are a range of different relationships with the federal government. Some of them are quite simple in terms of transfer of authority. Some of them are more involved or elongated. And some of them amount to, well, y'all can do anything you want, but at the end of the day, SCA, you are going to continue to be responsible.
Thank you. So then let me go to this thought, because most of my work has been in government, and government is very specific about the function and how much time you're allotting to appropriate and authorized responsibilities, work that you're doing. So if we're still responsible, because we have those ties to the funder, and we're left with 25% of a budget, we're going to still have some responsibility. And that responsibility is going to have to now come out of that 25% budget that's remaining. So I guess what I'm asking is who's paying for us still having to deliver the deliverables that we have to deliver?
So I'm going to answer that in a couple, three ways. Okay. The first is, I wouldn't look at this in a dollar perspective, because the child care payments really skew the conversation. The budget has been for years disproportionately child care payments, and the movement of the child care payments to MyLeap doesn't indicate a movement of 75% of the responsibility of the department. So I wouldn't look at this in terms of dollars. However, I did say that I thought that we had been historically underfunded in terms of FTEs, in terms of bodies to do the work, in terms of bodies to do the set of responsibilities. I continue to believe that. I thought it has historically been the case. I continue to believe that it is the case. Ultimately, this boils down to responsibilities. There are several early childhood responsibilities that have devolved to MyLeap, but there are still an enormous number of responsibilities, and not just responsibilities, but growing responsibilities that remain in the department. So it's not simply the historic responsibility, it's the growing responsibility. So it's not the addressing of children's mental health when there was no funding in the state, but rather the addressing of children's mental health post-pandemic, post-Oxford, post-MSU, and for that matter, the notion of school safety, when now we have $328 million of per pupil funding associated therewith. We have a cross-sector work with MSU for $15 million associated therewith. We're trying to build out mental health support. You heard today 2 presentations on Goal 7 addressing the teacher shortage. 3 years ago, there was nothing in the State School Aid Act for this, 4 years ago. Now we've had a year where we had $575 million. We're now a year with $448 million, a multiplicity of programs, a lot of work involved. So it's not simply that we haven't had the requisite support to deal with the historic responsibilities. It's that the responsibilities have have burgeoned, not simply nominally, but within each of the categories. And I could go literally category by category through the department and reflect upon this. So I think the bigger issue is the endemic issue, is the endemic underfunding of a department which is so integral to students and staff across the state.
And most likely to the new department.
Well, I would say, look, I don't believe that the new department helps in any way, shape, or form with that. We've talked about this. The new department pulls resources in a variety of different ways, and the state legislature added FTE and budget in the supplemental for the new department. But the underfunding of MDE, the understaffing really of the department, goes back far earlier than MyLeap, is something that goes back 25 years or so, and comes forward and is affected by far more things than simply the advent of MyLeap. I'm not saying MyLeap isn't a thing. I'm just saying that there are a lot of other things as well.
Okay. I know that there are other questions. I have several other questions. My question here, it still, or my thoughts here, I don't know that I still understand. I guess my thought is that we have a U.S. Department of Ed or other agencies that we have to respond to, and we have to make sure that things related to early childhood are being addressed. You've named some other programs that are being addressed, but the dollars are someplace else. And I have not been made comfortable as someone who took an oath to uphold the Constitution that we are not doing all that we can to make sure that this department is doing what they're supposed to do. But I'll allow more questions to come, and I'll think through.
Well, let me just say, I took the same oath with the same seriousness to that oath. I do believe that the department is understaffed. I think it's been historically understaffed, and I think it is additionally understaffed at this time.
Yes.
Yes.
We would agree.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. Who's next? There we go. Ms. Snyder, Dr. Robinson.
So, I mean, I just think this is going to be a very robust discussion, but I want to level set it with the concept of, when you say he's not a lawyer, you're not a lawyer, we're not lawyers. We do have lawyers on the board, but at the same time, public education educates students to read the Constitution, understand the Constitution, elect individuals that will execute the Constitution as it's written, and there's no doubt about the constitutional responsibilities of the State Board of Education. And so, at this point in time, to suggest that gutting the Michigan Department of Education by 75% of its budget wouldn't impact how we work together to oversee K through 12 and public education is just, it's very laughable. I mean, maybe we don't have, and you say it's not FTEs, it's policy, and Pam's kind of breaking down that policy, and yet, again, just like last month when I said, okay, hold on, how are these dollars in Perkins actually going to pan out? When we're trying to reach students before they drop out, by the way, Michigan's dropout rate is pretty high. We want to reach them before. So we don't transfer dollars that oversee things like these issues that we're supposed to be talking about here at this table in a way that creates chaos and confusion in a system that's already trying to come back from something that broke it even further. So I just, to level set things, nobody should feel here like we need a lawyer to make it clear to us that, in fact, something is unconstitutional. Now, would it be corrupt that we cannot find a lawyer that would be willing to take on the AG because she has said on its face, she actually hasn't spoken very clearly on whether or not this is constitutional. What she has essentially said is, well, I don't know, she'll make her move first and then we'll decide later, which is not leadership. So, I still hope and believe in our justice system that there are lawyers out there that would say, yeah, that is not constitutional and we should take action.
Well, if you'd like to engage one, that's fine. Dr. Robinson.
So I don't know if there are answers to these or if they're just more questions. It sounds to me like what I'm hearing is MDE will retain the responsibility as the SEA. This is acronym time for non-majors. Without the funding, the commensurate funding or FTEs.
Right.
Okay, so I was a public school teacher. I'm used to that.
Yeah.
Right, that's an unfunded mandate. That sounds unfair. It doesn't sound like good policy. Second, will the federal government continue to recognize MDE as the SEA, even though the governor has now created what looks like another SEA?
Yeah.
Miley.
So let me take the two questions. The one rhetorical, and then
a little rhetorical. But
I think it was more than a little rhetorical. But whatever. I'm not going to quibble. Far be it from me to quibble. Your point about the illogic of removing functions, but there still being an aspect of the responsibility remaining,
right,
and that responsibility needing staff, that was made very clearly. That argument
was made by who to whom?
I made it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I want to make sure that was, because I appreciate that you made that.
You do, but everyone didn't. The argument was rejected, and that too is passive voice.
Right.
So I just want to be clear that I agree with you on the first point. Pulling all FTE associated with particular responsibilities, or ostensibly responsible, dealing with all responsibilities, but in fact, leaving some of the responsibility here of necessity because the feds say that some of that responsibility stay here. We do not agree with that. And we made the argument that there should be retained FTE or shared FTE or new FTE. And at the end of the day, all of those were rejected.
Okay. Do other states have multiple state education authorities?
So there are other states that have various riffs off of this theme, yes.
Okay. So that's, hopefully someday talk about that. My last...
It's a longer conversation.
I'm sure.
Just a point.
Mm-hmm.
It's a longer conversation and a really important conversation.
I believe so.
Yeah.
My last one, I'm not sure if it's a question again. I just want to be on record as saying that I am not a fan of budgeting for schooling that turns into competitions. So I'm not a fan of $40 million for a FAFSA completion challenge or $10 million for a READ competition. If we are going to figure out what kinds of interventions, whether it's professional development, curriculum innovation, whatever it is the most effective, then I want everyone to use the most effective things. I don't want a Hunger Games competition to find out what schools will succeed and what will not. That's not education. That's a bad business model. And I just want to be on record as saying I don't endorse or agree with putting kind of loading the budget with poison pills that are competitions where we're picking winners and losers. Our job is to help everybody in this state succeed. So that's just there's no question there, and I'm not asking for you to go on the record with it, but when I see competition in a state budget, my hackles go up.
Educators for years have been involved in chase the dollar competitions.
Well, I'm reminded of Race to the Top.
Right. Race to the Top is a good example. We discussed it recently.
Yep.
And Race to the Top, in my view, did not benefit school children in the country, not a bit. And in fact, in many jurisdictions, race to the top adversely affected school
100%.
children, in my
So
perception.
I don't see the point of replicating that now in the state budget process.
No, there is a long history of people believing that competition in public education improves public education, as opposed to supports for educators, for students and staff in education. And I think what many would argue is support of students and staff is going to drive higher student achievement than is some bizarre chase the dollar competition.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Dr. Pritchett and Ms. Tilley and Ms. Lipton. Go
Okay,
ahead,
thank you.
please.
Slides 11 and 12, I've really just got some questions, so I make sure I understand it, and I appreciate this conversation because part of me keeps saying this is the executive branch recommendation. We've not heard from the Senate or the House yet, but this is what we've got right now, and all of us have concerns about the shift that was made in December. But I just want to make sure I'm understanding. The letters, Tran, on slide 11, letters not the sole recipient of funding from 35A. Instead, MDE, that's MDE only, that's how I'm reading it, must determine a list of eligible approved providers. So am I interpreting that correctly, that
Yes,
there will
ma'am.
be, okay, all right. I also noticed that My Kids Back on Track remains with the department, even though My Kids Back on Track is not only can be offered during the day, which is tutoring to bring kids who are struggling, but it also can be a before and after school, which was technically moved to MyLeap. So we've got some intersection going on there. Okay, slide 12. Can you tell me what MERI is?
Mary is the Michigan Education Research Institute. That is a group of researchers that we work with.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. So we've got this $155 million recommended, again, and a committee to be put together to work with this research group to evaluate literacy PD. I am having a hard time getting my head wrapped around that. For $155 million, committee to rank PD that I'm not sure the districts are required to follow. You know, okay, I have a list of PD here that this group, committee plus the research group. So I'm just throwing that out as that it's not real clear to me. And again, I know these are bullet points. And the read competition, I totally agree with my colleague Mitch and others, I believe, around the table at this point. You know, it is a grant for districts, but the criteria is going to be determined by a committee that right now is pretty nebulous. And the districts that are going to be awarded whatever this money is also going to be determined by this committee under MyLeap. But, you know, literacy isn't just pre-K. Literacy is pre-K through 12, or that's how I've always looked at it. So, again, kind of my editorial comments here. Really no question, because I'm waiting for some answers that I'm not sure anybody has.
I mean, Stephanie O'Day is the governor's K-12 ed advisor. She is a part of the meeting. If she's listening and cares to elucidate, that would be fine. Do we? Does Ms. O'Day, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, would you care to help us better understand this category or these two categories?
I'm not sure what the question is.
Just some clarification, Stephanie, regarding especially the read competition. That's, $10 million in grant funding to be determined by a committee that I'm not sure who would make up the committee. Is it just pre-K? Is it pre-K through 3? Do we have any other criteria?
So the criteria is established in boilerplate, and the goal of this is for districts to be innovative with some literacy practices. We are looking to encourage innovation and hoping that it will spur some great practices that move the needle on student literacy outcomes in a way that we could potentially scale up statewide.
Okay, so it's not necessarily pre-K, because we could have a community-based pre-K who comes up with an innovative literacy approach, but that would not be followed through then when those children hit kindergarten, because they probably would go to various districts. Or am I being too literal with that?
I don't think I'm not sure where you're getting the pre-K part of it from. It's an early literacy, it's a competition.
So pre-K would not be included in that, then it's just K and above.
Are you talking about because it's being administered by MyLeap? Is that your question?
My question is, there's a grant competition here for $10 million that's going to be determined by a literacy committee. And I guess I'm asking, who's going to be eligible for that money?
Local school districts.
Local school districts, so we'd have to start with kindergarten then. It wouldn't include pre-K.
This would be administered through the Office of Educational Partnerships at MyLeap.
Okay. To school districts. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Okay.
You had a question about the ranking of elements, professional development and curricula.
Yeah.
In the $155 million line item.
Yeah, on slide 11, if letters is not going to be the sole recipient, well, that's MDE is going to come up with a list of eligible approved providers. Down under improve early literacy, back to slide number 12, we've got a committee must critically evaluate literacy PD and rank that literacy PD or curricula. That's going to be this committee that doesn't exist right now, but will fall under MyLeap somewhere.
Yes.
Okay, and then they will rank curricula and resources and provide that to districts, but will districts be required then to utilize only that, or they can look at it as a reference and still keep using the curriculum they're currently using?
So they will rank and create tiers, and districts will be rewarded based on falling into the top tiers, and then districts will also be incentivized to adopt curriculum and materials that fall in a higher tier than what they're currently ranked in.
Okay, so if they're using curriculum B, and that's not even ranked, but curriculum A is, then if they shifted to curriculum A, they would be incentivized to do that.
Correct.
Okay, so it's like a business model. All right, okay. Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Pritchett. Ms. Tilley, and then Ms. Lipton, please.
Excuse me. I have several. First, I want to concur with some of my board members. If MDE has a fiduciary responsibility for grants management, then we should be billing MyLeap for that. That's one thing. Two, from my understanding, MOUs still need to be signed. Have they been to date? Have they all been signed yet or completed? And if not, has that affected any programming?
The programming is unaffected. Students and staff in local school districts, in ISDs, and community-based organizations have been unaffected, to the best of our knowledge, by the transition. That said, we've signed 2 letters associated with the change with MyLeap, and have shared those with Department of Health and Human Services. Those are the easiest of the transfers. The more involved transfers involving MOUs, they've not been finalized. Those are very involved. They require a lot of staff time. They have required, and they will continue to require, a fair bit of staff time. And it's not simply our staff time at the state level, although that does exist, but it's also federal staff time as well. There's just a lot of there.
So that goes back to, if we have fiduciary responsibilities, we should be, or MD should be billing MyLeap for that, because that is taking up time. That's hours that staff could be dedicating to something else. The programs associated with the goals, I'm curious, did the department have any recommendations that you guys gave to the governor
Regarding?
as far as the different goals, the different improvements that were made? Did you, because I know you have been advising over the time that you've been
No
here.
question, yeah.
So were any of those things that are being implemented any of the department's recommendations?
We're talking about fiscal year 25 budget recommendations?
The goal 1, 2.
Oh, I see what you're
3,
saying.
7.
I got you. Okay. So yes, there are aspects of the fiscal year 25 exec budget recommendation that contain our recommendations, and then there are things that are unrelated to our recommendations. There's no doubt. It's a mishmash. It really is a mishmash. In certain cases, we're involved. In other cases, less so. In some cases, we make recommendations through the budget process. In other cases, we make them outside of the budget process, and in some cases, they get recommendations from a wide range of other places. So,
in other words, MDE did have influence and leadership.
No doubt, no question, yes.
Slide 23, can you elaborate on school infrastructure and consolidation? It's more specifically consolidation, but I'd like to know about those.
Right, so
Slide 23.
It's the 2 FTEs for infrastructure and consolidation.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay. Yeah, I was looking for something quite a bit different. Okay, thank you. In the fiscal year 23 budget recommendation, the governor recommended $1 billion over 6 years for school infrastructure. The idea was that there are many school districts, we've talked about this, that don't have the tax base to afford a bond or a sinking fund or a sufficient bond or a sufficient sinking fund to address their capital needs. And when they can't address their capital needs, their operating budget either gets adversely affected by those costs, or those costs are just ignored. So your roof caves in, got to deal with the caved in roof. But you may not be able to build a new school, and so you may have to limp along with that 110-year-old school. Mm-hmm. You may not be able to build the new wing. You may not be able to put new...
I remember the department wanted to do an assessment of, is that a part of that?
Well, so let me just finish the history, if I could, please. So the $1 billion in kind of shared governance That ultimately was not approved. What was approved was $475 million, half of which was supposed to be for infrastructure, half of which was supposed to be for consolidation. And there was a study that was required for infrastructure. So in other words, if you wanted to participate in the infrastructure money at some point, you were going to have to permit your facilities to be assessed, system by system, school by school. And that's what's going on now. That's what Oakland Schools came in to talk about. Do you remember that presentation by Steve Ezekian and a few months ago? Right, okay. Right. So that study is going on now. It is voluminous. It's 3,400 school districts. It's 3,400 schools. It's 890 96 school districts, and. It'll take a couple of years to complete. Separately, there's consolidation money. And some people wanted infrastructure money, and some people wanted consolidation money. And they munged together, and they came up with this strange combined fund. The consolidation money is able to be used for one of three things: the consolidation of services, the consolidation of programs, the consolidation of buildings or districts, okay? And in order to access those dollars, you have to do some sort of a consolidation study, miniature consolidation study for your school, your school district, or it's basically what might be the art of the possible if you put these two districts together, if you put these two programs together, if you put these two schools together. So in the one case, there's an incentivization of consolidation because there's the feeling among many in the state that we have too much infrastructure for the number of young people that we have. There's a feeling among other people that we need to upgrade our facilities. And then there are people that really are in both of those groups, if you will, that think that we have issues. We need to tighten down the infrastructure. We need to be more efficient in what we do, but we also need to upgrade at the same time. That's the history of the last 3 years around those themes.
One, what are some of the incentives? And two, how long before we will have a full report on how many schools will be consolidated, whether it is services, programs, or the buildings?
So I think this is going to roll out over 5 to 10 years. I think it's going to be a very, very long process. You may recall that 14 years ago, there was an effort by a different governor around consolidation. And it was also around incentivization of possible consolidation. And there were a few districts that consolidated. There is a tremendous amount of shared service provision in the state of Michigan, a tremendous amount of shared service provision. And there's very little understanding of that outside of public education. But the ISDs do a lot of shared service work with the LEAs, the intermediate school districts, with the local education agencies. I think what you're going to see is studies this year and next that local school districts do. And then I think you're going to see some dip their toe into that water for consolidation of buildings, consolidation of programs, consolidation of services. I would not anticipate an enormous number of consolidated districts, but continued efforts at shared services, you bet. Reductions in the number of buildings, you bet. The possibility of closing some older schools and building new, I think that's absolutely critical. Some of these buildings, they've had their day, and they were immensely important to children and families in communities throughout the state. But they've lived past their useful lives. And that's not simply my view, it's an architectural determination as well. The cost to build new isn't a whole lot different from the cost to do substantial renovation.
And so specifically, do you know some of the incentives that they're offering?
Well, I think the incentives are in terms of the dolings out of the fund, that there would be dollars to help local school districts consolidate programs, consolidate services, in some cases consolidate the a couple of districts together. This was done in miniature in 2011, 12, 13. You may recall Ypsi and Willow Run. You may recall Albion and Marshall, for example. But not a whole lot of takers 14 or 15 years ago. Now, in fairness, not the same dollars either. The dollars this time around are much more substantial. So I think that will be of greater interest in certain regards for local schools and local school districts. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, financially, it was a more challenging period 12, 13, 14 years ago than it is now. And necessity being the mother of invention, one wonders how much consolidation takes place after a relatively strong financial period. Conventional wisdom suggests that these sorts of reflections about consolidations tend to take place in tougher times. And so as finances get tighter, and finances are tightening, you can see it in this budget. What Dr. Golzinski presented to you represents a much tighter budget recommendation than in 23 and 24. Dollars much more available in 23, much more available in 24, much less so in 25. So as dollars tighten up, as budgets tighten up, the interest in consolidation is going to grow.
I just want to go back and say thank you for, reaching out to MyLeap and trying to get them to acquiesce. I hope that you continue those conversations, especially when it comes to the burden on the department. And I think that should be determined in, how much time are employees going to spend on the grants management piece, and how much is it going to cost the department? So, thank you
very much for sharing that. I appreciate that, Ms. Tilley. Ms. Lipton, then to Dr. Pugh.
Can I just make a suggestion? I think that Ellen is okay with this, Board Member Lipton. If we could come back to the conversation, because I think a lot of the conversation is going to be about MyLeap. We have more opportunity to talk about MyLeap.
What you want to do is to take Dr. Golzinski, let her go out from that seat?
Yes, let her go out from the hot seat and put our guest speaker who's been patiently
No,
waiting
I think that's beautiful. Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate you.
Board Member Lipton agreed.
So just to be clear, that conversation is not ended. It is postponed, from what I understand, until after Mr. Coleman does his presentation. Is that correct? Beautiful.
That is correct.
Okay. I don't have any issues with that as long as the other board members don't. Okay. Every great act has a warm-up act, and I'm the warm-up act here for a great act, and I mean that with affection. Mr. Ken Coleman is a career journalist and published history researcher who covers Southeast Michigan, economic justice, and civil rights for Michigan Advance, a nonprofit news site. He is a former Michigan Chronicle senior editor and served as an American Black Journal segment host, which airs on Detroit public television. Mr. Coleman's work has been cited by the Detroit News, Detroit Free Press, History Channel, and CNN. Additionally, he was an essayist for the award-winning book Detroit 1967, Origins, Impacts, Legacies, Wayne State University Press, 2017. In 2021, Mr. Coleman was commissioned by the Federal National Endowment for the Humanities to pen a feature on Detroit's historic Black Bottom community. Additionally, he was featured in the four-part series Underground Railroad, The Secret History, which aired on the Discovery Channel Canada and Science Channel in 2022. Mr. Ken Coleman is a former Historical Society of Michigan trustee and a big proponent of Big Brothers Big Sisters. Big Brothers Big Sisters of Metropolitan Detroit Advisory Board member. Good to be in space with a fellow big. This is an information presentation. No board action is required. Mr. Coleman, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rice, Dr. Pugh, certainly your colleagues on the board, Dr. Pugh. I certainly want to say so many familiar faces around the room in different capacities of mine, and so it's great to see so many folks. I've only been here as a reporter, so I've never been here as a presenter. I'm a little nervous. No pressure. Thank you so much, Tiffany, Board Member Tilley. I only called you by your first name because we've known each other for years. She did reach out to me and asked, would I be interested in presenting? And so it is an honor, friend, to be sure. I certainly want to say hello to the audience, both in public and virtual. I should just point out, Dr. Rice, really quickly, I'm going to get right into this, but I'm so proud because my nephew is over my right shoulder. Kyle Coleman is a sophomore at Michigan State University. I think he's got his green sneakers on. And it's, obviously being down the street in East Lansing was a good opportunity for him to come and see the presentation. He, by the way, Kyle Coleman has an interest in public policy. And so I think that the conversation today that he has seen thus far will help to, shape his, his future as a future policymaker in some form. I am thankful again for being here, particularly because it's Black History Month. And when we talked about a particular topic, what did I want to present? I thought it'd be a good opportunity to talk about Michigan's role in the Underground Railroad. A lot of people had the feeling that the Underground Railroad was simply a southeastern Michigan operation, or certainly Detroit proper, because of its proximity to Windsor and Canada. But that's not so. And in some of the slides, you'll see, you'll probably remember, most of you are very learned people, you know some of the history, but hopefully I can impart something that you might not know. It is interesting that this meeting is held on the calendar date, February the 13th. Many of you know I'm fond of posting on this day history on social media, and I posted earlier today that February 13th, 1855 was an important day in Michigan's history. It was the day that the Michigan legislature pushed back on the notorious 1850 Fugitive Slave Act. A supermajority of members of the House and the Senate, and let's be candid, in 1855, they were all white people and probably all white men. They were all white men at that time. And so it points to, I lift it up because it shows us that what we can do together as Michiganders, regardless of race or color or gender, we can do great things and help lead the nation. As you know, we were one of the first states to really sign up for, if you will, and push back against slavery and sign up to push back, sign up to be abolitionists and represent and have an opportunity for every man and woman. Women came a little later, obviously, but people of color, to be sure, to be equal members of our community. So the first slide, I just go with a working definition, if you will, of what the Underground Railroad was. It was not a physical railroad, as we know. It was a system of routes, many of them clandestine and operated by code, where African American people, particularly in the South, but we shall see in some slides coming up, in the West too, in the western part of our country, were able to get to safe places like Michigan, and ultimately like Canada, and become free people. So the Michigan Historical Society said that not a physical road, but a network of people across racial identities who helped fleeing enslavement, people fleeing enslavement. Detroit is a big part of the Underground Railroad, but as you look at this is a slide that I took at Second Baptist Church in Detroit. And many of you know Second Baptist is the oldest African American congregation in Michigan, formed in 1836, 1 year before Michigan joined the Union. Formed by 13 former slaves. People often ask me when I do history tours, Coleman, why was it called Second Baptist Church? Because there was a First Baptist Church. And it was a majority white church that did have African American members, but there was a point in time some of those members felt that they were being discriminated against. And so those 13 men, and some of them were women actually, petitioned the state territorial government. Again, Michigan's not a part of the Union yet until 1837. So this map shows the different routes along the Underground Railroad in Michigan. And it really, as you see, is really just the lower half of the Lower Peninsula. I should point out, and researchers far more learned than I have discovered that there were actually men and women of African descent who escaped slavery and moved to the Upper Peninsula. And so there were, in fact, there's a gentleman who escaped. He went first to Marshall and then was able to get up to the UP, and that was in 1848. He actually helped to create a small city in the UP that was rich in copper. And he sold copper, this former African-American slave, sold it to a major mining company there. These are a couple more photos of Second Baptist Church in Detroit. The church is led by a young pastor named Lawrence Rogers. The church hosts bus tours and tours of the church on a regular basis. The photo that you see on the left is a stairway leading down to a holding space where Black slaves were kept at night or whenever they could get out of the church and head to the river. The holding area is directly under the sanctuary. And if you go on a tour of Second Baptist Church today, you can literally go down and see the holding area where escaped Black slaves were hidden until they could make it to the foot of the river, the foot of the Detroit River. But Black churches, African-American congregations, weren't the only homes of worship that were involved in helping slaves to find freedom. If you know downtown Detroit well, you know this edifice. It is Mariners Church at the foot of the Detroit River, just west of the tunnel, Windsor-Detroit Tunnel. This was a white church, white-led church that actually harbored slaves until they could get over to Canada. If you know where Mariners Church sits right now, you might also know that they didn't always sit there. The church was physically moved in the 1950s. It used to sit, Dr. Pugh, at the center of where Hart Plaza is today. And that proximity to the water, only probably a couple hundred feet, made for a great holding place, a hiding place, a sanctuary, as we call it today in the vernacular, for African Americans. And so when I'm able to do bus tours, go to Second Baptist Church, but also point out that Mariners Church and other churches in Detroit for sure, and across the state naturally, were part of that movement. As I pointed out, whites and Blacks played a role as abolitionists. And this gentleman here was a major businessman in Detroit, Seymour Finney. He was a hotel owner in Detroit in the middle of the 19th century. He was also he also had a barn and stable. He had another hiding place for African Americans. Finney is an important name in Detroit's history. There's several members and descendants of Seymour Finney went on to become leading lawyers and civic leaders. If you know Detroit well, for many years, and I think it's going back to that now, that name, we had a Finney High School. It wasn't named after Seymour Finney, but rather one of his grandsons, Jared, who was a leading attorney in Detroit. But an abolitionist, a man who happened to be white, but fought for Black freedom. Another gentleman that you'll know his name if you know Detroit well is Shobel Conant. And for those of you that know the Northeast Detroit community called Conant Gardens, that community is named after Shobel Conant. Conant was a wealthy land owner in Detroit in the middle 1800s. He did something very revolutionary at that time. He petitioned to have the phrase "no Negroes allowed" on deeds, on property deeds. And so the reason why Conant Gardens in the 1930s and 40s was a leading middle-class Black community is because African Americans were able to build homes and buy homes in that neighborhood without the racial covenant language. And so Conant is a very important person in the abolition movement, and certainly wanted to share a little bit of his history with you today. African Americans who were leaders in the abolition movement, probably the father or the conductor, the mayor of the Underground Railroad in Detroit was a man named George de Baptiste. George de Baptiste also was a businessman. He moved here like a lot of people that lived in Southeast Michigan, moved here from the East Coast, but became a leader for sure in a very young Detroit. You'll see in some later slides more visual images of him, and you'll probably recognize at least those images. I can't talk about Michigan's role in the Underground Railroad without talking about March of 1859. That is when John Brown, the great abolitionist, who happened to be white, met in Detroit with Frederick Douglass, who happened to be African American. They met at a Detroit resident's home, who was also an abolitionist, William Webb. It was, and for history majors around the room, you know that John Brown had an idea. In 1859. He wanted to, with a group of men, commandeer a military complex in West Virginia. Dr. Rice is shaking his head. He knows of Harper's Ferry. You know, Dr. Rice and others, that plan did not go well for John Brown. What's interesting about that Harper's Ferry engagement is that he met with Frederick Douglass 6 months before and tried to encourage Frederick Douglass to help him. And Douglass said, you know, I feel you, but I can't go. I can't go. But seriously, obviously what happened, the arsenal was way too much for John Brown and his group. John Brown was sentenced and hanged by the end of the year. He was gone 6 months after the meeting with John Brown, or with Frederick Douglass. What's interesting, you see that Michigan historical marker, it still sits in downtown Detroit on the campus of Blue Cross Blue Shield on the Lower East Side, and that's another popular place that I'm really proud of, and I'm proud of y'all's work, because we get an opportunity, there are many of us that get an opportunity to take school-age children on tours and see sites like that site and other sites. And it only happens because of the cooperation with state government, the Michigan Department of Education, and obviously school districts and individual schools. So please know that the work that you're doing continues to be important. So I want to move across the state a little bit. I talked about, it's somewhat of a misnomer, that much of the Underground Railroad activities happened in southeastern Michigan. That's not necessarily so. I'm ashamed to say this, but I did not know it throughout my Detroit Public School K-12 experience, but I had no idea that Sojourner Truth had a presence here in Michigan and lived her last years of her life in Battle Creek. And what you see on the photo on the left is a statue of Sojourner Truth that is in Battle Creek, and then her gravesite that's in that city as well. This statue, if you haven't had a chance to see it, it's phenomenal. It's been part of our Michigan footprint for about 25 years now. Other cities that were important in Michigan's role in the Underground Railroad is Ann Arbor, the site of the first anti-slavery society. Detroit had an anti-slavery society, but the first was in Ann Arbor. That is another Michigan historical marker that still sits today. And if you think about it, if you go back to the earlier slide we looked at, the bottom half of the Lower Peninsula, you see all the routes really in that sort of what we call today I-94 and I-96 sort of footprint. Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti were really important cities along the Underground Railroad. And I wanted to lift this up. I know that many of you know the work of the Michigan Freedom Trail Commission, but they've got a really exciting website that I don't know if you haven't seen. If the commission hasn't been here through DNR, you may want to invite them. What you're looking at is a photo of Michigan, but an interactive map. And so young people now and anyone who wants to know more about the Underground Railroad and Michigan's role in it can literally go to the interactive map, the website, and hear oral histories from descendants of family members who were slaves. It's a really cool thing. It's a really cool tool, I think, for classrooms. I know I'm going to try to find a way to impart it in the public speaking that I do, the tours that I lead. I just discovered that through my reporting at Michigan Advance this fall. So I think it's pretty new, or at least their advertising of it. And so I wanted to lift up a story, a personal story of two slaves who escaped Kentucky in 1831, a married couple, Thornton and Lucy Blackburn. She's sometimes known as Rutha. It really had two names that have been kind of recorded. But Thornton and Lucy were African-American slaves in in Kentucky. And they managed to escape in 1831 successfully for quite some time, lived in Detroit and became part of Detroit's landscape until 1833 when state officials in Kentucky realized that the Blackburns were in Detroit, sought to extradite them, and the boy governor, Stevens T. Mason, who was, I think, 24 or 25 at the time, sought to send them back. Because remember, this is before that 1850 Fugitive Slave Act that I talked about earlier. That was still in play at this time. Well, Stevens T. Mason and others wanted to send the Blackburns back to Kentucky, but the community was not having it. Blacks and whites banded together, and Detroit was a small town in 1831, but banded together to protect the Blackburns, actually commandeer their escape in two separate incidences. And over the course of several days, Thornton and Lucy were on their way to Canada. It's a long story. If you don't know the story, it's a really important one. I'll just say that this story had a very happy ending. They ultimately did move to Canada. They escaped to Canada, did not return, moved to Toronto, and actually Thornton Blackburn opened the first taxi cab service in the city of Toronto, a man who had been a slave less than 10 years before then. And so here I have in a slide just more anecdotal evidence of individuals making a successful escape from the South or from the West to Detroit, or maybe sometimes ultimately Canada, and then sometimes coming back. And there were some incidents of that too. But in deference to time, I won't go through all the slides. What I do want to show is that this is an advertisement where the newspaper is looking for Thornton. And so, as you can see, a $25 reward for the apprehension of Thornton Blackburn. Final man I want to lift up because it represents the Blackburns were Detroiters, if you will, until they moved to Canada. But the theme of this, I want to point out Michigan's role in the Underground Railroad. Adam Crosswhite was an African American who too escaped from Kentucky, but he moved to the Marshall, Michigan area. And so that sort of represents the movement, the type of movement that we saw. Many of us have been able to record and write about. He was a little after the Blackburns. He was extradited and actually through a lawsuit was going to be sent back. The community again, this time in Marshall, Michigan, whites and blacks again, and I should say indigenous people as well, banded together to protect Crosswhite. Crosswhite goes to Canada, but ultimately, when the coast is clear, if you will, moves back to Marshall, where he spent the rest of his life. And so finally, in the last couple slides, back to the sort of education role and the role that I think that communities can play in lifting up the history of the Underground Railroad is a set of actions or activity in Cass County on the western side of the state, at the Illinois and Indiana border, essentially. There are community organizations that are looking to preserve through state and federal preservation dollars, save 4 important structures in that county that had to do with had a role in the Underground Railroad. One is an African American schoolhouse. And so I lift that up. If you do have time, and I think we are providing you with this slide deck, there is a webinar on February the 22nd at 1 p.m. where you can find out more about the activity that preservationists are doing in Cass County. Again, it's just not Detroit. It's just not Marshall. It's just not just the Upper Peninsula, but activity going on throughout our state in preserving this great history. And so as I kind of close out, I just want to put on each of your minds, and I know it's part of what you do, let's find ways to include more of these stories within curricula. I've been very fortunate to work with Detroit Public School Community District General Superintendent, Dr. Nikolai Vitti. And there are several of us that have been able to work with Dr. Vitti through his committees to infuse more local history through not just lesson plans, but through curriculum. And if they haven't been here in recent months or years, I think they've got some really important stories that they can tell, maybe share with other school districts across the state. The final person I wanted to lift up in the last 2 slides is a woman named Mary Ann Shadd. You may have heard of her. Another point of pride, Kyle Coleman, my nephew, is a direct descendant of Mary Ann Shadd. I think she would be like a great-great-aunt, so not that. And so Shadd was actually born in Delaware, born free. But Delaware was still a state at that time. Some of you know that Delaware was one of the last 2 states to abolish slavery after the Emancipation Proclamation. But Shadd was free, and her activity here in southeastern Michigan and Canada was really important. Her efforts in the Buxton area, which is an African American community, about 30 miles east of Windsor. If you're on your way to Toronto on 401, you pass it. That community still is very active. They had a 150th anniversary last August. There is a museum there, and when you are in downtown Windsor, and this just happened in the last couple years, there is a statue of Mary Ann Shadd in downtown Windsor, and that I think is a beautiful thing. She is thought to be the first African American female publisher in North American history. I thank you for your time. Again, this was indeed a great honor to present. I feel like I know y'all, everybody now, so, but if you have any questions or comments, if we have time, I'd be glad to take them.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you very much, Mr. Coleman. We appreciate it. Mr. Bullock.
Oh, well, first, great presentation.
Thank you.
I wish you had more time to elaborate on all of those things, but...
Have me back.
Although we didn't get to talk about African-American curriculum earlier today, these are the things that we've been promoting for years, is to have these kinds of things infused in our educational system universally, instead of all these oh wow moments that we have to give in these isolated presentations throughout our existence. I mean,
In one month.
we've endured some of the greatest atrocities, but yet been some of the greatest contributors to society, but yet these things aren't taught. And so I just want to commend you on what you do, Black Bottom and all the other things that you talk about. But these are things that we really, really, really is dear to us about our curriculum and our education system and wanting to be Black history is American history, is world history, and it shouldn't be deleted or left out or separated Egypt from the rest of African world history as if they're not the same place. So that's all.
I appreciate it, Member Boyd.
So you got a lot in that 60 seconds. That was a power-packed minute. Thank you, Mr. Bode. Mr. McMillan.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. That was a fascinating presentation. And yeah, I would love to hear a lot more. But you mentioned tours, or, I think, I would think that a lot of schools could use field trips. And do you take?
We do. We're blessed to do quite a few of them. Colleges and universities.
How would they get a hold of you on that?
I should have had a slide deck with my information, but Dr. Rice's team does have contact for me. Website, cell phone number, social media handles. I do quite a bit.
Okay.
And a lot of it is direct contact with school districts.
Okay.
Because I'm a one-man show and I got a full-time job as a reporter. I've been blessed to have school districts call me when they see a social media post, okay, or a friend in government or in a school district will say, I saw this guy, I saw what he's offering, you ought to do it too. So I'll make sure that you've got, that the entire group has more information. But yes, we do quite a bit, particularly in the summer, even family reunions. You'll be surprised, family reunions in metropolitan Detroit, a lot of them want to see historic sites too. So we get an opportunity to do all that. A lot of public speaking engagements. I did Eastern Michigan a couple of weeks ago, Wayne State next week, Wayne County Community College next week. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. Ms. Tilley.
Thank you for the presentation and visiting us, staying all day. I appreciate that. And bringing your nephew. That's awesome. Can you, before I make my comment, can you state your website for the record?
Yeah, so I'm going to give a couple handles to be sure. So the website is www.historylivesdetroit.org. The email address, the easiest one, is colemandetroit@gmail.com. I'm on X as History Lives, LIVESDET, the first three letters of Detroit, History Lives DET. On X, also on Facebook as Ken Coleman. And I think that's it. But I'll make sure that the team has all of the handles.
We'll send it out.
Thank you so much.
That's
appreciate the time.
Thank you. Appreciate you. Any other? So go ahead, please.
You had the churches in the presentation and their role, and ironically, I was watching a video this morning talking about, which I knew some of, but it talked about the role that religion played in slavery.
Yeah.
And it talked about
in a lot of different ways.
In a lot of different ways, and it talked about the slave Bible, and how 90% of the Old Testament was taken out, and about how 50% of the Old Testament was taken out, and the Bible is in a museum in D.C. But if you can expound upon that.
I can tell you that is clearly part of the Second Baptist tour, the Second Baptist Church tour, the African American church that was founded in 1836. It is part of the presentation that the tour guides give, and they actually have some Bibles that go back, that were used at Second Baptist, that go back to the 1800s. It is very much true. I mean, religion has been used to subjugate people. Religion has been used to free people. I didn't talk a lot about it, but it is in the slides and worth noting. Many of the men and women who were part of the abolitionist movement were either friends of the Quaker community or actually Quakers themselves. And they played a large role, Quakers did, particularly in our state, in bringing about the abolition of slavery. One other quick note, and I hate to drop this at the end of a presentation, but there was a form of slavery carried out in Michigan. We're certainly known as a free state, And it wasn't the sort of chattel slavery that we saw when some of us were growing up and watching the Roots miniseries. It was more like indentured servitude than physical chattel slavery. But there are accounts of slavery happening, and certainly in Detroit in the 1700s.
Thank you.
How long would that endure?
Most of the research that we have is that it was more like indentured servitude. So it wouldn't be, maybe it's 2 years or 5 years, or maybe it's, until X, Y, and Z is carried out, rather than a life sentence, if you will. The chattel slavery really was for the most part.
Does it die out because of statute, or does it die out? It does.
A combination.
Okay.
I talked at least about one 1855 pushback. But the role of the anti-slavery societies, Ann Arbor in 1836, Detroit in 1837, those movements, helped to play a strong role. I didn't talk about Fannie Richards, Detroit's first African American teacher, but nearly 100 years later, the men and women, whites and blacks in Detroit, sued the Detroit Public Schools and the state of Michigan in 1869 and argued successfully that race discrimination was being carried out in the public school system. The Detroit Public Schools did operate a handful of schools that were black schools, but black kids didn't go to school with white kids. And as you might imagine, there was a resource difference in how it was carried out. So it's a long way in terms of answering your question, Dr. Rice, but I think a lot of what happened was the law, was government, and were people who were community members who formed anti-slavery societies all across the state. And again, that proximity, remember, Canada abolished slavery 30 years before we did. So that was a destination place. And to some extent, I think a lot of that activity happens in churches on both sides of the Detroit River, churches working together. I think a lot of that pushed away, the form of slavery that was carried out in the late 1700s and maybe very early 1800s. But by the time we get to 1830s, 1840s, and certainly by 1855, we're generally regarded as a free state and one of the leaders in the abolition movement.
Thank you. That was really helpful. Any other questions or comments from board members? No. Please.
So, I mean, this was a great presentation. I'm really appreciative of the era that you selected. And then when you come back, would love to hear more. You talked about Black Bottom, but even how African Americans migrated and the start of redlining, maybe, as an early 20th.
Because there was a role that education played in that too.
Yeah.
And creating boundaries, boundaries that were set up to be black communities, and
and then we can clearly see, because it's in a lot of the government documentation where people had to live and had to remain. So, but this was really good.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
So, Mr. Coleman, if the board were interested in some sort of a tour, so that it could actually role model the importance of comprehensive history instruction, would that be something that you might be interested in?
Are you kidding me?
We would be.
Of course.
Right, very good. We will be in touch in that regard.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We
Take care.
appreciate you. Thank you. Give him a big round of applause, please. Board, it is 3:35, and we're going to take a 10-minute recess and pick it back up at 3:45. Okay, all right, that'd be the second. And then we return and finish up that last conversation. and Tom's thing. Because what I want to do is I want to give that the full time that people have an interest in it. I don't want to abbreviate it, but I also don't want those other two things to get shoved out.
Right.
Those other two things are miniature. Get them done, and then we have whatever we have.
Okay. Yeah, that's
moving
fine.
forward.
It
Okay.
just-
All right. Good. Thank you.
And we are not implementing it, right? Like that's, okay. But I appreciate you being here. Also know that. So long that you can go over to next week. Did you see my? What we have. So, yes, sit and rest when you need. Do you need anything signed? Not that I'm aware of. Thank you. Not a problem. We will. Do you need anything to drink? I have a water. Yeah, you got it. You got it. You're welcome.
No, I'm just having a hard time finding this. Maybe it's just our, like, firewall. Maybe.
You don't have to.
The ISDs for coaches.
Just a matter of, that's just a matter of,
Well, she rightly so pointed that out. We have all this money, and though it might not have to pay for it, she sure had. I agree. But we got others to do that. Hi, how are you today?
thank you. No, I appreciate you. All right, you got it right. You got it right.
Right.
Excellent. I kept catching myself now. And then I'd look over at you to giggle. Yeah.
Did you catch his email address? Did he say colemandetroit@gmail.com?
I do.
Gotta find out. I'll ask Liz Evans. I bet she has it.
Oh, Kelly?
Matt, before I'm Howard Barron.
Yeah, nice to see you.
I've got something for you. Let me grab an article for you.
You familiar with this? It was in the NSBA, or not the NASB, or back a year ago or so, I think. Yeah, January. Yeah.
I'll take a look. Thank you.
Please, yeah.
I appreciate that.
It, I think it gives us some thoughts in terms of how top 10 plan.
It's just fascinating.
The top 10 plan was from 2020 when Dr. Rice finally got it approved. The updated plan. There was Brian's plan and then August 2020. So is there a thought in terms of when there might be a reconsideration of it? Was there a timeline? Normally like 5 years or so.
Thank you. Listen, I got Kelly, I got Bob.
So the next
All right, thank you, Dan.
You are welcome.
I knew you could set me straight. Oh.
Absolutely, I'd love to maybe next meeting. Also, congratulations on the.
Well, the transition back to college.
I had nearly that exact same day every year. That was my favorite. Can't give it up yet. Oh, great.
Probably not gonna go.
Not in here. It's like an iron dome over here.
He agreed, but he said I should send the information. I just wanted to go to the If not, no money, then on his website, I thought he said history lives in Detroit, Michigan. If it comes back as undeliverable, I can always text him and ask him. But I just remember the dumb thing.
Bar.
And the service like here at my house.
Right, right there.
Things would be a lot more interesting.
It'd either be a lot faster or a lot longer.
It's true. It's very true.
Yeah. I'm gonna see if I can get in with the hit and miss. Yeah.
We're now doing a 3-pronged consortium between Hazel Park.
I am at a state board meeting.
The appearances, the 3 of us are so close to one another. We should be doing more things together. So we're doing an internship program. I just like to do like road trip, and we would pay for the buses. Take her on there and do like a lunch.
Yeah.
It was amazing. Thank you
Keep
so
it
much.
digital with all of the sites.
So good.
I just did a double negative anyway.
So I'll get it out to everybody. But
It's not like I'm trying to tower.
that's what I wrote as well.
We short people do like to tower over people every once in a while.
HistoryLivesDetroit.org. Yep. Now I will say, did you her his website.
Okay.
And she said it wasn't
I'll
going
send
through.
it to you right
Now,
now.
Okay.
it doesn't
I'm
mean
sorry.
that it couldn't be because
He's
of our
very
firewall.
good.
She was just
Cause
doing it
that
on her
was that
I've got
personal
Peru
phone.
right
friends
up
that
the
got
street.
So,
family
like,
coming
we haven't
from
tried it on our
in the
personal
first
phone,
of
but we'll
August
send an
and
email out. We're gonna collect
tell the
all
whole
of that and send it out. Yep, absolutely.
About what? The Chicana? She don't know where it's at. I told her, she texted me back. She was like, I don't know.
Okay. I didn't know if you told her to call you or.
I texted her and then she was like, I have no idea.
Hello. Hey, how are you? Call and text. It's so hard. It seems like ever since they put those new windows, lately it's like hit or miss.
my daughter emailed
having
me
guests, but
something,
not
so I emailed her back with the question.
She's delightful, delightful.
And it like took 15 minutes to send. I still don't know whether it got through to her or not, so. Oh, you know what? I just signed this. We made a change, so.
To confirm this date.
Just sign it in. Just fine.
Crickets, and I'm like, please just let me know. Can just get back, can you please give me a phone number? And finally, I was so disappointed because I thought after I saw like the first poet laureate come and speak, but I just could never get through to her. So
Yeah, no, he was very, like, responsive to email, responsive to text, just, I mean, just very easy to work with. Yeah, I know. I was so excited when he was like, how about this? I'm like, oh.
I just signed this and I realized we had changed the minutes. I hadn't signed
Joe
it.
Tate stars at
We will. Let me ask. Hey, Jean.
5 o'clock. 2 blocks down from, one block over, 1 block up at Beer and Wine
Well, no.
Wholesale.
Can you just print the edited new last page?
Yeah, page 11.
Are you going to go?
Yep. I plan to be, yeah, so whenever I get leave here, I usually stay up here for
That one's
2
all
or 3
set.
hours. Work. My regular job. Today just happened to be fundraiser day. I need to talk to Sarah. I got an appointment with her on March 1st. She coming to Detroit, so she gonna see the mayor. Greg Eaton gonna see the mayor that day. And Wayne State President Epsy, got her seeing him that day. Because her investiture is next month. She's official program to be the president of Wayne State.
You said who?
Espy.
Whenever she sat down.
you're fine.
Oh, Brian Murray. Brian's on one.
What's that?
I always,
Gary's still
always,
down.
and I'm gonna go.
And I'll say, I knew. Brian ran 2018. Did you tell me about
Is
that?
that on there?
Where did the collect our
They gave me the idea to have the poet laureate. I thought the first, first poet laureate chapter for the poetry show like that would be very
Franklin
good.
wife out on
From one to another books coming out. I tried going through.
You. Good, how are you?
Good.
The way Marty and I did this was, he did it all. And then at the end, I go, yep, we met, and we're not gonna meet in February. We're gonna have the legislative luncheon. And we'll see you next month.
It's all good.
Hey, because
I don't know her either.
You can tell who the teachers are because we're all wearing our red.
I don't know
Yeah.
too.
You know.
But I know Danielle well.
holiday at the
Yeah.
end, even though I was a secondary teacher,
Me too.
they could care less what I was.
Oh, you know what? They care. They just don't show it. They show it differently.
That's true. Yeah, you're right.
My 2.5-year-old grandson gave me my first eye roll last week.
Love it.
I got the old. He was very dramatic about it.
I hear you. I'm standing right.
I know.
I've already walked,
Yeah, I live
3 miles
DC.
today.
So I got a DC in 99.
Okay. All right, here we go.
Thinking these things and sweating.
Hey, not a problem.
And just be like, chum, chum, chum.
There you go, ma'am.
He was just DJ Khaled, like Kim Jones. Get down there.
Give it to her, because she's got the folder.
Elevator tonight. He was just DJ Khaled. He was the DJ at the hottest clubs like Opium on the Beach.
She just sent his weekly emails, so see what he's got to say.
I saw my representative in the House building today in the elevator. We get along great.
I've already
He's,
shared.
Other people think I do good at, I always.
Next item on today's agenda is the state and federal legislative update. We'll now hear from Dr. Cheryl Kennedy at 352, Legislative Liaison in the Office of Public and Governmental Affairs with the state and federal legislative update. Dr. Kennedy.
Hello, thank you. Hi, everyone. So we have been rocking and rolling, even though the House is not doing a lot on the floor. There's been a lot of committee work. Today, for example, the House Committee on Education took testimony both last week and today, or they took testimony last week and voted out today for Senate Bill 518, which has already passed the House and Senate unanimously, and that is to extend a sunset which will allow us to provide certification to alt-route special education teachers. The Senate Committee on Housing and Human Services took out House Bills 4676 through 4678, testimony last week. Today, these bills were reported out of committee. And Ms. Tilley, I'll just let you know that's the beginning of our foster care work, not the end of our foster care work. The Senate Committee on Education had testimony on Senate Bills 567 and 568 last week. This is often known, more commonly known as the dyslexia package. There was testimony last week. There was testimony today. We expect a few slight changes of timelines and things like that in bill, and we expect that to be reported out next week. And Dr. Rice, that finishes my report. Oh, Mr. Bullock, I just wanted to share with you your question this morning. The bill you were speaking about from Senator Geis was Senate Bill 354. You were talking about the praxis test. And just so you know that the praxis test does not align with our Michigan state standards for teacher preparation. Our test in Michigan that we've invested a lot in does meet those standards much better than the praxis test. And the reciprocity bills that we passed a few years ago that allow for teacher reciprocity, we believe really helped teachers with experience to move into Michigan. And I believe there's also a budget item that allows teachers to take their first MTTC test without charge.
Take that. The reciprocity kind of balances that out. So the other question is, there were some bills introduced either last week or this week. Hazinga had a dyslexia bill.
Yes.
How does that differ, or is it in conflict with the ones that they're hearing testimony on now, or?
I can get back with you on that because we just received those bills, and so we send them to our team, the experts, to analyze, and we'll get back with you.
Gotcha.
Dr. Robinson.
I maybe did not hear you clearly. Did you say there's an opportunity for people to take their first MTTC test for free? I'm assuming you mean people coming from out of state?
I believe it's everyone. I'm looking at people who are looking at me. Maybe.
So current students that have to take it in order to graduate?
Let me get back with you. I want to give you accurate information.
Because that would be news.
I want to give you accurate information, and I might be thinking about our new executive budget that just came out, so, okay.
What other
All right.
questions do you have?
About
Nope.
that?
Yep, very good. Okay, any other questions for the board? Hearing and seeing none, thank you very much, Dr. Kennedy. We have 2 resolutions to consider. Madam President, would you like to move yours?
Yes, and I've already read it into the record, but
So if we could move it, please?
I move the resolution for acknowledging Chicano History Week and supporting Chicano studies.
Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second by Mr. Bullock. President Pugh, back to you.
This is, and I know that Judy probably has some input, and I definitely will welcome the conversation there. But this, it doesn't need a whole lot of conversation. We heard from the team that came before us. Chicano History Week was observed February 2nd to February 8th, and the governor signed that this year and last year. But we also want to make sure that we're supporting legislation or encouraging public schools to provide instruction and provide opportunity for children across the state to learn more about the history, as well as the contributions, even the struggles of Mexican American, Latin American, Hispanic, Latino, and Caribbean Americans, and the history. And just want to make sure that we are showing our support for that curriculum, that being introduced and provided, and teachers having the ability to teach that. And so that is what this resolution is about, acknowledging Chicano History Week, as well as supporting and encouraging public schools, intermediate school districts, and public schools, academies to provide that opportunity for instruction.
Dr. Pritchett.
Thank you. And I believe it's been passed around. I have talked to Pam, and I'm offering this friendly amendment. And you'll see that it deals just with the be it further resolved. So that wording, some of it was just syntax, so I was just working with some syntax there, but you'll also see that I have struck out supports legislation because I wasn't aware that there was any legislation or what that legislation had in it. My biggest concern is, because I hadn't seen the legislation yet, adding another graduation requirement to high schools, because that is the last thing we need, in my opinion, at this point. I don't have any issues with Chicano history or social studies teachers or elementary teachers providing that instruction within their classes. As it indicates, provide age and grade appropriate instruction. I know that those standards are included in social studies standards, the Chicano history. So that's why I adjusted the language the way I did. So that I'm offering a friendly amendment just on that section of the resolution.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Pritchett. Dr. Pugh, back to you.
Well, I see others who want to speak.
That's fine. We want to do first bites, that's fine.
Well, let me just, I will put this out there. I knew that there was Senate Bill 798 of 2022 that one of our colleagues helped did co-sponsor. I did not write that specific legislation, but what I did want to say is that we supported legislation that encourages. I didn't want to use the word require. I did not use the word require. So I want to say that, and then we can come back to your suggested changes.
Okay.
Okay, very good. Ms. Lipton, no? Very good. Dr. Robinson.
Just a semantic thing on number 4, sentence 3, include the word and before public school.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other corrections, changes? If we have a friendly amendment, is it accepted?
I still want to have supports legislation which encourages, and would like to get Judy's thoughts on that. The rest of it, I'm good with.
Again, as long as that legislation is not another mandate. And because I haven't seen the legislation, I'll ask Mr. Bullock if he knows if that legislation includes that language, or do we know?
I do not know at this time. I glanced at it earlier today, but I can't confirm right now without pulling it back.
Here, let me pull it up. But I did not put Senate Bill 798.
No, that's true.
So
you just indicate legislation.
Yes.
So as long as we just keep supports legislation that I can speak, legislation which encourages public schools, I'm fine with that as long as the legislation, when passed, whenever it gets passed, or signed, doesn't have in there that it's
So it's something that we can make sure that
required or mandated.
Right. Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, what you could say, I think, to answer both issues would be it further resolved, the Michigan State Board of Education supports legislation which encourages, parentheses, but does not mandate, end parentheses, public schools, intermediate school districts, and public school academies to provide age and grade appropriate. So you could, if you wanted to.
Except the issue with the mandate isn't about the instruction. It's about a requirement for graduation or adding more requirements. So I don't think we're saying we don't want instruction to happen.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I think supports, encourages, I think that those are words that don't come across as mandating. And we did not put
specific
legislation bill
right.
in here.
No, you do not have a specific bill called out here. So I can accept supports legislation which encourages public schools.
Okay. Then if they require something, we come back.
Yeah. Which I don't believe is the intent, but I'm cognizant of the fact that
anything could happen.
Anything could happen.
Yep. Can I ask for the last paragraph to just be read, so I make sure that I have everything documented for change?
Yes. So just so you know, we're accepting everything except for the first strike through on the version that Dr. Pritchett provided. So it reads, the Michigan State Board of Education supports legislation which encourages public schools, intermediate school districts, and public school academies. There's an S on the end of public school. I think you have that version.
Yep.
Okay. And then the rest is as suggested, the friendly amendment provided by Dr. Pritchett.
To provide age and grade appropriate instruction concerning Latin American, Hispanic American, and Caribbean American history.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, thank you.
And the A in Chicana, that first A should be an O.
So the friendly amendment as amended in a friendly fashion has been accepted. Seeing no objection associated with, is there any more discussion associated therewith? Going once, twice, thrice, hearing and seeing none. Ms. Evans, a roll call vote, please.
Bullock?
Yes.
Lifton?
Yes.
McMillan?
Yes.
Pritchett?
Yes.
Pugh?
Yes.
Robinson?
Yes.
Snyder?
Yes.
And Tilly?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Mr. McMillan, we are to your resolution, which I think will be a pretty good vehicle for continuing the conversation. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that.
Does anybody on the board disagree with that? Because I don't want to give short shrift to the preceding conversation, but it was what I thought was the spirit of what our president was saying earlier, so that continuation of the earlier conversation is subsumed into the conversation around Mr. McMillan's resolution. Hearing and seeing no objection, Mr. McMillan, would you like to move it?
Yes.
So moved. Do we have a second?
Wait a minute, wait. I'm not sure, oh, okay, and then we were gonna table it if,
I'm asking, do you want to move your own resolution?
um,
It shouldn't be complicated.
Well,
okay, yeah, I guess I can move it and then we'll have discussion. A second, then discussion. Okay.
There
yeah,
you
I
go.
move it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have a movement. Do we have a second? Do we have a second? There we go. And now we have discussion. Now it's to you.
Well, I think I want to pick up where we were, and I think it was to, board member, was that where it was, or? I can begin. I've got a list of things, but I think you two. Oh.
What's that?
PowerPoint, Brock?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't believe it's a function of the PowerPoint.
I can start it up again.
No, we've got the motion, we've got the second. We're into discussion. It was to you, I believe.
Yes, but I did have some questions pertaining to the presentation, so they're not specifically targeted to
That's fine. That's
this.
fine.
So if I could just
Absolutely.
just ask those questions. And I'll ask them of you, since Dr. Golzinski is
right here.
Oh, there you are. Okay, so I can do both of them. Okay, so
She can rejoin us at the table.
Yes, I'm sorry, I was looking that way. So on slide number 3, the question I had was the FY25 per pupil for cyber charter schools, 80% of the foundation. That's the current formula. In other words, that the notion that cyber schools are getting 80% of the foundation, that's not anything new, right? That's carried forward from prior budgets?
No. It is a previous recommendation of governors.
Okay.
It has not been accepted by the legislature.
Okay,
So this is a recommendation that not only our current governor has offered, but our preceding governor offered, and it has never been accepted by a legislature.
Okay, I knew I'd seen that 80% before, but I was just wondering if there was some historical basis to that.
It is something that governors tend to agree on, and legislatures tend to agree on in a different fashion.
On the issue of per pupil funding, does this budget, because maybe I missed it, is there any indication or discussion about carrying forward the opportunity index that we've seen in this current budget, or is the opportunity index not carried forward?
I believe it is.
Okay. Then I had a question about transportation funding. There's no slide on transportation funding, but it's just based on maybe a press release that I read or something else. And also, it just triggered it based on the public comment on this My E-Fleet. And so I just want to make sure I understand. So the transportation funding that I recollect is $350 million from FY23 supplemental, and that both the FY24 and FY25 talk about $125 million reimbursement to school districts per year, leaving $100 million in that FY23 $350 million pot of money. So 125 over 2 years, totaling $250 million for direct reimbursement to school districts. Is that, I think the answer is yes, but I just want to make sure I'm reading this right. At the top of this sheet that was handed out, it says the program that will leverage $125 million of federal grant funding for EVs in schools. Is that the same $125 million? Is that where they got this from?
No.
So it's just a coincidence.
Separate line item for electric bus, or clean energy buses.
Separate from this.
Correct. The 125, in the supplemental, a separate fund was created for transportation dollars. In FY '24, $125 million was given out in per pupil funding to help cover the cost, to contribute toward the costs of getting general education students to and from school.
Regardless of electric vehicles.
Correct. Nothing to do with electric vehicles. Right. In FY '25, another 125 from that fund is being proposed. What we provided in the presentation today was just things that changed. We didn't bring forward things that stayed the same as last year.
So it's just coincidence that it's $125 million, but this is federal funding for, I just want to make sure that this is, that I understand this statement. The program that will leverage $125 million of federal grant funding. So there's a different category, federal funding, that who's administering that one? The department is.
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make, I saw the 125 and I thought,
correct.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. Okay. And I think that was it in terms of my questions regarding the budget. Let me just, okay, yes. Yes, that was it in terms of my questions. So I do have some comments on the Miley transfer, but I'm going to get out of turn and go back, defer to Mr. McMillan, since it's his motion.
In the interest of some measure of clarity for whatever small number of community members may be watching, if we could wrap up conversation about the broader state school aid budget and then narrow it down to the MyLeap conversation, I think that would help in the interest of community being able to understand and follow what we're doing. And I'm going to ask Mr. McMillan to repeat his resolution, which was read into the record, 7 hours ago or 6 hours ago. Seems a fair. We'll give you another copy, Mr. McMillan.
Okay.
We won't leave you hanging. Any other questions broadly on budget for Dr. Golzinski? Okay. All right. Very good. If not, Mr. McMillan, we have a motion, your motion, which you moved, seconded by Ms. Snyder. We're in discussion.
I thought it was.
Dr. Pugh seconded it to put it on the agenda.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So but the seconding for the purposes of this conversation was Ms. Snyder. If you would just read the brief resolution into the record so that the people who are now following, who weren't following 6 hours ago, know what we're talking about.
Be it resolved that the Michigan State Board of Education opposes the following portions of the governor's fiscal or FY25 proposed budget. The transfer of $414.5 million in federal child care payments that go to child care providers on behalf of parents from Michigan Department of Education to the Michigan Department of Lifelong Education, Advancement, and Potential, and also the transfer of $15.7 million to fund 77 Office of Great Start positions from MDE to MyLeap.
Okay, so thank you. Please go ahead.
Can I speak to that?
Please, yes.
Okay. Is that okay? Okay. So I've got a few things here remaining, and we did talk about this extensively. And as I mentioned when I asked this to get on the agenda, that there might be more that comes up. I certainly, and I know that President Pugh also has a concern about the literacy piece, and I think perhaps others that do as well, Judy. And I'm sorry, it is getting late, but I really want to understand this. I know it's just a proposal, but I think maybe the legislature, might look towards us, or MDE in lobbying might like to hear what the board thinks about these things. And real quickly, as I'm understanding this the literacy coaches funding is going to be at MDE.
I'm just trying to see what you're.
Okay, and the literacy supports committee that's going to do all kinds of things, including coming up with PD, professional development, at 155 million is going to be in a different location. So MDE is going to do literacy coaches, and that's going to stay with MDE, and yet the 155 plus the 155 million plus the 10 million is going to be at MyLeap. Is that right?
That is as we understand it.
Okay, and then the letter, or Michigan Kids Back on Track, 150 million to dealing with early literacy, expanding tutoring, as I understand, will be divided between MDE and MyLeap. That's what I think Board Member Pritchett had determined or thought or heard.
I don't hear about the division.
Oh, I thought there was going to be some at MDE and some at MyLeap.
No, I was just making an observation that it is under MDE right now, the way I'm reading this slide.
I'm sorry.
I think so. I think to the point, I think literacy coaches under MDE, My Kids Back on Track under MDE, and the two proposed new elements, the 155 million in literacy supports, the READ competition, 155 million and 10 million respectively, would largely flow through MyLeap, as we understand it.
Okay, and is anything that MyLeap is going to have dealing with K-12 in literacy? Is it only?
Yes.
And is it, okay, so it's not just pre-K and post-12?
I think that was to Dr. Pritchett's question.
Yes.
So, okay, it just seems to me, especially when, things like the advent or the realization that, Lucy Calkins and all the problems that have been out there with literacy, the way that literacy might be done can be divided, problematic. I mean, it seems like we're going to have competing organizations talking about literacy, spending money on literacy, and everybody wants to say, we care most about kids learning to read, and you learn to read and then read to learn, and all these nice sayings. I also remember, and when I first got on the board, myself, Cassandra Ulbrich, and then President, and Michelle Fecta, the three of us went to an AFT. Did he just leave?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's not well.
Okay.
I mean, getting
all right.
cough drops.
Okay. Talk about board decorum. Come on. Okay. So the three of us went to an AFT union hall and listened to teachers, particularly kindergarten teachers and young kids, and they were talking about how all their time was consumed with checking 77 different observations of students and literacy, and how kids are taking tests in kindergarten and first grade about reading and crying, and it was just the ridiculousness of all these things. And I thought we had gotten rid of some of that, but I'm just saying that it can be done wrong. I mean, this could be, when we're talking about whether MyLeap is taking over some of our roles, our functions, this certainly is an area where I think a divided is a real problem. I could see in the future MyLeap saying, well, let's just bring it all in here. We're doing a lot of it. We got 155 million. Let's bring it all in here. And I think that it's an area that is MDE's. It is the state board's constitutional role. As Young Zhao, a favorite education philosopher and leader, has said, he said right here when I first came and invited him to our board, that you can force any kid to read by third grade, but they may hate it. They may hate it for the rest of their lives if you force them to read too early. If you force them, there's a natural progression. And so, you can do a lot of damage is all I'm saying. I'm not saying it should be third or second, but kids are all different. And we're gonna have some committee that's outside of MDE doing all kinds of things that I think are going to infringe on what we are supposed to do. I think will potentially harm children. And so I am very concerned about that portion. And like I said, it didn't make it into my initial resolution, but I certainly hope that when we do take something up, if we do, that's included. The second thing is, and again, I apologize for going over this, but early childhood, now I heard things at this table that I wasn't sure about. The 414 million, is it, that's going over to MyLeap for childcare, early childcare, but then we're gonna also have some early childcare. And so it sounds like, is there a division there? Like, it's not clear, like there's gonna be some things over there and some things over here?
I think the answer is that, according to the executive order, all the elements that used to be in the Office of Great Start are now in MyLeap. So, from a state perspective, early childhood has devolved to MyLeap. But from a federal perspective, that is not the case. In some regards, that's not the case temporarily because we're in transition. In other cases, that's not the case in relative perpetuity.
Well, that's the part I was, yeah.
Because the feds consider that the state education agency is the responsible party for particular programming.
As long as it exists.
Well, as long, I mean, yes, but I'm, yeah, but.
I say that tongue in cheek.
Right.
I'm just saying
okay.
it could end up being the MyLeap for all we know. So, okay, but it just does sound like it's divided. There are some things that in perpetuity is going to be here with early childhood, and it's also
I
going
would
to be.
say it a little bit differently. I would say, in most cases, it devolves to MyLeap completely, okay? In a couple of cases, it will end up being a lightly shared responsibility. That MyLeap would be responsible programmatically, but will be responsible for certain programmatic elements, certain financial elements.
Okay. And then I'm going to go pretty quick here. So there was the distinction that was trying to be made about constitutional, that it sounds like there's a division here about whether we still continue pursuing the issue of constitutionality and through the AG, or the AG isn't the final authority, the courts would be. So somehow going in that direction, I think, Dr. Rice, if I heard you, you felt more of a policy difference, that there's policy differences we disagree on, and all I know is that the governor has a bigger bully pulpit with policy differences, and she has a lot of control over the budget. So while we may think we can argue the policy differences, I think when it gets down to it, it might just be that she'll listen to the courts, and that's what's going to happen, is that if there is a crossing over constitutionally of our responsibilities to over there, then that's how you resolve the policy differences, is by something that is firm and set in stone. So I can appreciate that, maybe there's an interest in, I don't want to say soft pedaling, but not making a big deal out of what's going on and just calling it quote unquote policy differences. But I think it's substantially more than that. The governor, according to Gongwer, has put in $740,000 into AG assistance in anticipation of legal challenges to MyLeap potentially, according to what they were saying. It was a little bit obscure, they said, but I don't know if that's, I don't know, the governor must be anticipating that some people will challenge what she's doing. If she didn't think that, I doubt that she'd be putting the money in there into the budget. So I think that there certainly is an area that needs to be litigated. I have seen too much in politics. I've been in politics since the late 80s, where people are telling us, particularly administrators, telling elected officials, wait, now is not the time to act, and then all of a sudden, oops, too late, sorry, now you don't need to, it's too late to act, no use looking backwards, it's all a fait accompli. And so I've seen that tons of times since the late 80s, since I've been in politics, and I feel like we're in that time right now, that we have been told since July, since December, wait, wait. It hasn't, a line hasn't been crossed, there isn't the constitutionality, but I think we are there. I don't know if we're going to have to wait until the budget is passed, but I think we should be going back to the Attorney General. And if she doesn't come up with the right decision, that there's been a constitutional breach here by the governor, then I think, hopefully some of us can go to the courts, or whoever could have standing. So I hear all these meetings that you're having with MyLeap. I hope that there's some, adversarial position there. I hope it's not all, I feel like we're getting sold this, what the governor wants, as opposed to trying to figure out what's the right thing to do, and that does include constitutionality. So I'll leave it at that, and I can circle around after any comments, and we can determine what to do with the resolution that's before us.
Okay, thank you very much. Other board members? Ms. Snyder, and then Ms. Lipton.
I'm going to echo what Tom's saying. I mean, you should be fighting. We should hear a tone of fight in your voice on this matter. Instead, what we hear is a parsing out of nuance as to, what may or may not be happening, what is or is not acceptable, that we're not, capable of standing up against it or should be standing up against it. You should be fighting. That's a very real thing that you should embrace. We're accountable to transparent accountability, not just in the department, but as the State Board of Education that oversees all of K through 12. And when you look at, just look at page 12 in this earlier presentation, it talks about literacy and MyLeap establishing the $10 million for competition, and Mitchell referred to it as well. Read it and just understand what it's saying right now. It's saying foster district-led innovations in literacy instruction grounded in the science of reading, provide the state with insights into successful practices that could be scaled statewide and improve student outcomes in literacy. Isn't that our job? That's our collective job. And I would argue that the fact that we took that job away from local school districts decades ago and devalued teachers and what they had to say about effective literacy practices, and then we saw literacy do nothing but go down, and now we're asking them to compete for $10 million to be innovative in trying different literacy approaches when 34% of our third graders are proficient in literacy in this state. We're going to go and say, okay, after we've just thrown a bomb into the system, we're going to ask you to find out what is an innovative practice that's effective. Inform us. Doesn't that sound absolutely ridiculous? Well, and this is the process we're putting into place while we take a brand new bureaucratic body and say, let's share responsibilities while we're already underfunded over here. Nothing should infuriate us more than the concept that we have a state superintendent that isn't fighting. We should be fighting this. It should be very clearly unconstitutional. We should come together for the first time in a very long time and fight this. There's no doubt in my mind. I mean, when you just look at one of the foundational concepts of a public education is literacy, and this is what we're being sold. That's all for now. Again, I hope that it's robust. We keep having a back and forth because there's no doubt in my mind that this is not going to better student outcomes.
Thank you, Ms. Snyder. Ms. Lipton.
I just want to preface my remarks by saying I am not giving legal advice. But so yeah, I'm just speaking as a board member who happens to be an attorney, but I'm not giving legal advice. So my malpractice carrier, I think, would be happy to have me say that. Okay, so in terms of just process, we did ask the Attorney General for an opinion regarding the executive order. So under her responsibilities, she was only required and probably only supposed to answer the question that we presented to the Attorney General, which was, what is the constitutionality of the executive order as written? And although I don't have it in front of me, my recollection was something like, I'm opining on the constitutionality of the executive order as written, which I believe had some language regarding, of course, I believe that the MDE is going to retain its autonomy, something, 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 some sort of broad language. And that caused the Attorney General to conclude that there was nothing on its face that was unconstitutional with the executive order. However, I also recall that there was some language that this can be revisited as this particular executive order becomes effectuated. Having said that, elected officials, including legislators, as well as department heads, are always permitted to request Attorney General's opinions based on particular specific actions. And if this body believes that there is a new set of circumstances extending from the carrying out of the executive order, it is within any department head and legislator's right to request an Attorney General's opinion on a specific set of facts. What you can't do is ask for an Attorney General's opinion on a specific set of facts and then expect the Attorney General to continue to supplement their AG's opinion, because that's not within their purview. That's not within their guidelines of what they are charged to do. You give them a question and then they answer it at that time. If you want more reflection, you have to ask again and perhaps again and again. Also, I just wanted to point out that an Attorney General's opinion can have the force of law until the force of law kicks in. So you can always, if you meet the threshold requirements of meeting a case in controversy, and you file in the appropriate court, you can always challenge the constitutionality as long as you have standing, and that is then litigated, I believe, as a case of first impression in the Court of Claims, and then potentially you have one right of appeal to the Michigan Supreme Court. So that is the final answer on constitutionality, even more so than an Attorney General's opinion. Then just lastly, I will say that although I am not a constitutional expert, my recollection is that Article 8, Section 3 of the Constitution, the Constitution of 1963, has never been, there isn't any case law that that explains, because I don't believe it's ever been challenged. Again, I'm just going based on memory. So it's just, I'm not, I think that's the case, but I could be wrong. But the language in question reads as follows. This is from Article 8, Section 3 of the 1963 Constitution. Leadership and general supervision over all public education, including adult education and instructional programs in state institutions, except as to institutions of higher education, granting baccalaureate degrees, is vested in a state board of education. Shall serve as the general planning and coordinating body for all public education. including higher education, and shall advise the legislature as to the financial requirements in connection therewith. It goes on in terms of what the state board shall do. I don't believe that there's any case law in Michigan that actually resulted in the Supreme Court delineating exactly what that means. It is a very broad statement. It was very common in state constitutions. I don't think that that clause has ever been litigated, although, like I said, I am not a constitutional expert, so I could be wrong, but
this is
I
not
don't.
legal advice.
And it's not legal advice, but I don't think it's ever been challenged as to what boundaries that particular language encircles. So it may very well be a case of first impression. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that.
Could I just, I found the article that you referenced. If I could just say, on August 28th, Nestle said it was quote unquote premature to provide clarity on the order because the executive order has not yet become effective. So Nestle also said a facial review of the order indicated collaboration with MD and the Board of Education, and my leap will create collaboration between itself and the board. So it was premature. So when does that prematurity end? You know. Anyway, I don't want to. Whoever's next.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Lipton, Mr. McMillan. Any other questions or comments? Dr. Pugh.
You read my mind. We have a motion before us, and as Tom mentioned, it's pretty sparse. It's not a lot here. And after the conversations that we've had today, there are other flags that are raised for me, and I would say others. This conversation around to what Board Member Robinson said so eloquently, unfunded mandates, I think is the term you used. Board Member Tilley, you put it in your own words. And then this conversation around the goal 2 and how this now early literacy is spilling over into my leap. And I think that my thoughts or confusion was further validated by some of the questions that came up here. I think in particular, Dr. Pritchett, when you were asking Ms. O'Day if this was pre-K, and she said no, so now it sounds like we're in general, we're in K through 12, and it seems like mission creep. I do want to say one thing, though. I want to pause and to Board Member Snyder's point about Dr. Rice. These are very difficult times, and we're talking about children. I mean, I think at the end of the day, no one at this table is talking about someone on our turf. That's not what this is about. Although, again, we did take an oath to uphold the Constitution, but we, I believe, are all here because of children. And I want, and I think that we all want, Dr. Rice to be focused on serving children. And there was a huge transition of staff. 77 staff members. I mean, and how much time did we have to prepare for that? Not to mention trying to bifurcate who does what.
Has that happened yet? At 77? I'm sorry. I can ask later. I apologize.
So, I mean, I just wanted to point that out. I wanted to point that out because I can only imagine that would be a very, very tough place to be. But I think, again, that my leap harms the department and harms us from being able to do what we're here to do, which is to provide instruction for Michigan's 1.4 million school children. So having said all of that, I would propose that we postpone, table. I don't know what's the right thing to say, and I don't know where the right table is to continue this conversation.
I do know that once you move to table, there's no discussion on a table in motion. So let's just make sure we get it right.
Let's do that. Okay, so is it to clarify, okay, because you originally shared the idea. Is it your wish that this go to legislative committee for discussion? Because if so, that's a motion to refer it to the legislative committee, which is an opportunity for you to reflect upon what this resolution should be in a future meeting, and then to move it and second it and to have a discussion on it and to pass it or not, but to have it more fully fleshed out at the time of the next full board meeting.
And maybe even have folks from my league who could answer questions. I mean, I think it would be.
We have invited for 3 months my LEAP leadership to the state board meeting.
Okay. So they may not show up for the legislative meeting. But I think that that's probably a good space for us to have robust conversation. I just hope that when we do that, we really give thought to how we put that on the calendar, that the next meeting.
Can I point, I don't know what that is, point of clarification or point of order or some point. If we table it to next meeting, at least it'll be on the agenda. We can table it again. It can go to the committee, they can talk about it, but I'd like for it to, I personally would like it to be on next month. I think we should act, and maybe we won't, maybe then I think we should at least have it on there. So if we can table it to next meeting, we can table it again if we decide, but
Fair enough. So you originally raised the idea, okay? So, we're doing this in concert until you're not comfortable with, okay? We will exhaust yours, and then we'll hop over to his if there's a disagreement. If there's concurrence, that's fine. His, in a fashion-friendly amendment, is that rather than refer it to the legislative committee, and by the way, given calendar, we have a legislative luncheon in lieu of the legislative committee. So that's not going to serve us well in this particular case.
Right.
So Mr. McMillan's suggestion, Dr. Pugh, is that we postpone to a certain time. That is to say, postpone to the next meeting. That would be the motion.
Okay.
If you're comfortable with that. Okay, so there we go. So it's your motion, you're seconding it.
I guess I want to make sure, is there any other, before we do this, is there any other discussion that wants to be made? Maybe not, but can I ask you to ask that real quick?
You may. Ms. Tilley.
I just want to quickly add that when I initially asked for my lead to come, we did receive a nice little, maybe 5-page PowerPoint in response. So
about the request or about what?
About my leap, instead of them coming.
Right. So I think your point is that they didn't come, but rather they shared the PowerPoint.
That was the a very small PowerPoint that did not have much information on it. So
right. We
hopefully they don't think that sufficed. We still would like for them to come do a significant presentation.
This has been raised. It will continue to be raised. It's a legitimate point. Without doubt, it needs to take place. There's no question. Thank you, Ms. Tilley. Ms. Snyder.
My concern would be based on that information, which is new to me, that we've asked them 3 times and we've only received that kind of PowerPoint, that even if they do come, I think that the message has already been clearly spoken. And I think that if we continue to allow this to be strung along without acting, again, then we miss the boat on our opportunity to act collectively as a board. And ultimately what that then ends up being is we have a constitutional responsibility we're accountable to without any real space or responsibility to be accountable to what we actually are. And so if we don't act in a fashion that does create a situation where it needs to be legally interpreted, what is the Constitution saying in 1963 that we are responsible for, then it never ends up happening. I think that's something to consider. If we push it out and we table it now till next month, I just think then we end up getting strung along with, okay, come and see, and we'll ask 100 questions, but it won't really change the fact that they're taking responsibilities they don't have.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Snyder. We have a motion to postpone till date certain, that is to the next state board meeting, okay? We have a second, March 12th. We have a second. Any additional discussion associated with that?
I would just ask that, and since we're not tabling, I guess we can have discussion, that the board also consider it that, or be thinking about the idea of asking the AG to get an opinion. Not that that's the final, because then if she says, you know, it's still fine, then we could still go to, some could go to the courts, but just in the coming month, if members could be thinking about that.
Well, that's one thing that the board should think about. Another thing that the board should think about is exactly what it wants to pass in a resolution, because clearly it didn't want to pass what you put forward in a resolution.
Well, I mean, I made it clear, okay. I don't know if
Right,
that was
you made it clear that this was a conversation starter.
Right. Yeah, we need to embellish and fill it out.
But with respect, in a public forum, we should be closer to fully formed when we bring something forward. Okay, I don't deny the value of the conversation. That is not my point. I'm going to be clear about that. I'm not denying the value of the conversation. I'm simply saying I think we can get closer to what the resolution is that we have in mind prior to putting it forth. That's my only point. Okay. Anything more for the good of the group before we vote? Once, twice, thrice. We have a motion. We have a second. And it is to postpone until the regular board meeting of Tuesday, March 12th, 2024.
Bullock?
Yes.
Lipton?
Yes.
McMillan?
Yes.
Pritchett?
Yes.
Pugh?
Yes.
Robinson?
Yes.
Snyder?
Yes.
And Tilly?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Board members, comments by state board members. Mr. McMillan.
Okay. So this whole home, you know, and I could have brought it up because you brought it up during your superintendent report, but this whole homeschooling thing is really quite disturbing. And one of the things that disturbs me about this is the disingenuousness of the discussion. Because we have people like the Senate Education Committee Chair, Dana Pohanke, saying that when asked about increasing regulations beyond registration, she said, not on my watch. Well, we got Attorney General Nessel that says that she wants to do it because the foster care system didn't do their job, and apparently homeschool parents, there was some abuse going on at a homeschool home, or that actually it sounds like the foster care system, but certainly a mere registration, a list of people, is not going to have anything to do or will not help prevent what Attorney General Nessel is talking about. So she's already kind of said the quiet part out loud. She basically said, we want this list so that we can have unwarranted home entry without a warrant, warrantless home entry into homeschool, into this particular targeted group. And we want to be able to go in there, and you know, there's a lot of bad things happening all around the state potentially in some houses, but we have a legal system that says you have to have a warrant before you go in. However, because of this one instance, you know, some in the state want to be able to barge in and bust the door down, and I'm not being, you know, it's not hyperbolic. I mean, if they knock on the door and they say, no, I don't want you to come in, and there's all kind of reasons not to have them in. I hope I'm not the only one, but, you know, there's, to have the government come into your house, I don't know, there's a book called 3 Felonies a Day can't remember the guy's name that wrote it, but I mean, if the government wants to get you, they're gonna find something. And so there's just, without warrant, they shouldn't be coming into your house. And so I just think that it's gonna go beyond registration. That, you know, there's either they're either naive or they're being disingenuous for anybody to say, all we want to do is have a list. It's going to go significantly further than that. They're going to either want to know exactly what's being taught, or they're going to want entry into the houses. And so I think that this is a real problem. I guess I just wish that the debate would be sincere, because we have one of the leaders in the education area saying, I promise you on my watch it'll never happen, and that's only a few years. But we know that in other instances, registration leads to confiscation, registration leads to getting, rounding up. I mean, registration is the first step, and it's not the only step. And I wish that the debate were clear that, it's going to be a lot further than registration. The desire that the Attorney General has already articulated said that she wants warrantless home entry into this targeted group of people. And I think it's dangerous. I think that could be the next group could be next. I mean, who knows who the next group is, that there's a target for warrantless home entry. So that's my initial comment, or my comments on some push by some people to simply register so we know where they are. I think that's completely disingenuous or naive, one or the other, but we know it doesn't stop there. Anybody that has half a brain realizes it doesn't just stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. McMillan. Ms. Tilley.
I just want to, because you mentioned the foster youth, I just want to say that this has been an issue in the community that has been talked about for a while, about being able to track them, because they're bouncing from schools to homes, and sometimes there's issues where they've run away because of things that have happened. They want to better track them. I don't know about the other end of it, but as far as with the foster youth, that is a real issue.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tilley. Ms. Snyder.
I'll just echo what you guys both have said, and I wish we could separate them so that problem is solved and they do have access to an education just like everybody else, which we've been talking about. My resolution that I presented this morning, I wish that we would consider it. I don't think it's an issue that's going away. I think students have a constitutional right and reasonable expectation to privacy. I do. I've been very clear, too, and forthright with the fact that, it's oppressive to ask a student that has left the public education system for whatever reason they've left to then ask them to register with that same system. We wouldn't do that in any other facet of society. And so to give people the freedom to exercise choices that work best for them is extremely important. Just because we're one of 11 states doesn't mean the other 39 are doing it the right way. I don't think we need to approach it from that perspective. And I just really want to push back on things we've talked about at this table. Public education is not safer than homeschooling, and that means it's incumbent upon us to address that. There are multiple pieces of evidence that we've discussed here at the board table time and time again that we do nothing about, that prove public education needs a safety overhaul before we can claim that homeschool leaves students more vulnerable. So sexual abuse epidemic, where we refuse to register school officials who've assaulted students so they can be rehired elsewhere. Being concerned with requiring BTAM training, which we talked about recently at the local level due to resources it would take the department to audit them. And yet here we are thinking we have the resources to audit every family's educational choice in the state. That's unreasonable. And countless stories that violate a safe learning environment across the state, which I don't think we're done with hearing yet. So when you use the words disingenuous, yes, I think it is very disingenuous to suggest that we need to audit families and their educational choices because of safety, especially private and parochial schools, right? What ends up happening in other states that register students in these buckets, as you say, is we end up overseeing their curriculum. They're making specific choices to not be in public education so that they can access a curriculum we're not choosing to administer to them. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you start to ask them to jump through hoops, and you're really interfering and discriminating against their right to exercise educational freedom. So, I don't think the topic is going away, and I certainly don't think that safety in public schools is something that we should shy away from. I think we should be spending our time, energy, and effort in that, because that's what we have a constitutional authority over.
Thank you, Ms. Snyder. Ms. Lipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have been called naive by many people. I certainly would like to believe I have more than half a brain. But I would like to point out, since this is something that, an issue that I dealt with as far back as when I was in the legislature, when there was an instance of a young woman and I think her younger brother that were found in a freezer in East Lansing. And I was asked to carry a bill regarding notification of the school district. It was not registration, and I think that the use of the word registration is being used in a particular way, but it involved notification of a local school district of a desire of a family to homeschool, which by the way is considered optional right now. I first became aware of the strong feelings on both sides of that issue for the first time. I would hope my colleagues around this table would understand that there are strong feelings on both sides. There are as many victim advocate organizations that feel very strongly that a notification process, as is used in 39 to 40 other states, can also be done here, and it would not be overly burdensome. I also became very much aware that there are strong feelings that disagree with that. But I certainly think that it is the basis for a robust democracy to have a difference of opinions, and to certainly not belittle those that have different feelings as being naive, although, as I said, I have been called naive by many, but certainly not half-brained. And it is an issue that has strong feelings on both sides, and I am certain that the people in the state will have their feelings heard as they have in the past, and if the legislature deems it to be appropriate to have a notification process, then it will become the law, and if they don't, then it won't.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lipton. Dr. Pritchett.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to thank Tiffany for making arrangements for Ken Coleman today. I learned lots and appreciate the fact that you made that effort for Black History Month. And I want to commend all of you for the conversation that we have had regarding my leap and the executive recommendation for the budget. I think all good, questions. But I'm reminded a friend of mine who I counsel with quite frequently always says, when things like this are somewhat complex, take your time. I'm not saying ignore it. Time, make sure you have all your facts. and come together again and see what you've been able to find out. So that's my comments on today's conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pritchett. Any other board member?
Mr. Chairman.
We have three others that haven't had a first bite. I just want to make sure that nobody's still revving up before you rev down, Mr. McMillan. Please, Mr. Bo.
Happy Valentine's Day to the ladies.
Happy Valentine's Day. Always spreading the love. Always spreading the
I don't know
love.
about all this other stuff. What about me? I love you too. Thank you. Happy Valentine's Day.
A lot of love around the table. Mr. McMillan, would you like to give a benediction?
Well, I would just like to make it clear what I was saying and what I was not saying. I certainly understand that people may think that a registration is a good idea. I am simply saying that the idea that having a list of people is not going to stop what goes on in those houses. And I will say that I'm certain, or quite certain, I haven't seen any studies, but people are homeschooling. I doubt there's very much crime at all going on comparatively to the broader society at in a homeschool households. But if there is something not going on well in a household, a simple list is not going to do anything. Simply registering or notifying anybody who did something wrong in whatever instance you want to mention, requiring that family to notify or be put on a list does nothing. That's all I'm saying, is that the idea that it's going to increase safety by registering or notifying is not the end. The end would be, and we need to be able to break down the door if we want to, or force entry, or come in and check on the family, check on the kids. That's what is desired. And for anybody to say that registration, having a list, that's all we want. We don't, that's going to do anything. It's not going to do anything. So let's make it clear that that is not the end. That's not all that's desired, because having a list will not stop anything from happening. That's all I'm saying.
I'd like to add to that. It isn't going to do anything, because we see, again, going back to safety as we define it as a reasoning or a foundation for why we would do this. Okay, Title IX is supposed to protect young girls and young women in public education from sexual assault. Yet in my own home school district, we recently had an administrator that was let go from his job because he didn't adequately report a rape on campus. We don't realize this right now, but in Downriver, there's a school district with a female teacher that has had sexual acts with many members on the JV basketball team. And yet that's not being discussed because it's all handled behind closed doors. And we don't deal with the problems where they need to be dealt with. And so freedom in being able to make a decision that's best for you without your government tracking you is extremely important. It is extremely, extremely important. So safety for all families that are making the decisions that are best for students is important. And it's not like a family in these school districts that are dealing with that can just pick up and leave their local school district or leave where they live. If they choose to homeschool, they should be able to choose to homeschool.
Yes, ma'am. Ms.
I just
Tiller.
want to say,
I'll forward it to you.
yeah, please do. But I just want to say, too, that everybody's being tracked already. They have our social security numbers, birth certificates. Everybody's already tracked.
That's why we need to fight who owns our data.
Dr. Pugh, you are the last board member at this point, because we're 5:07. We can go to Applebee's and I'll treat everybody to chicken fingers, okay, afterwards. But
I'm saying.
But at some point, the free flow conversation has flowed pretty freely. Please.
I think maybe that this has been said before, but just in case it hasn't, I don't want it to be misconstrued. And I think that we have to be very careful that those of us who are proponents of having children registered that we are not saying that homeschooling is unsafe. We are not saying that we want to do anything beyond making sure that all children can be accounted for in the day. Ms. Lopez, who came to the end of the table, was telling me about a child who, not in homeschool, but somehow over virtual or something, became a child who was missing. We want to be able to know where that child should be, any child, and that is what this is about. And there's been a lot that has been read into what I am saying when I say that I believe that all children should at least be registered, so that we know that they're in a safe space. And again, being in homeschooling, if someone chooses to homeschool their child, they have that right. And definitely not at all saying that homeschoolers are unsafe.
Thank you, board members. Two things before I announce the schedule for the next 3 months. First of all, if any of you know of a crime against a child or a perceived crime against a child, you have a responsibility to report that to local police. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that the proposal around every child having an educational home is just that. Every child should be educated somewhere. Public, private, parochial, homeschool. Every child should have an educational home. I'm agnostic as to what that is. I'm a public school educator, yes. But I'm agnostic as to where mom, dad, grandma, or grandma decides to educate his or her child. But at the end of the day, every child should receive an education, without exception. And the society has a responsibility to make sure that every child is receiving an education, without exception. Future meetings of the State Board of Education are March 12th, April 9th, May 14th, all Tuesdays, all at 9:30, all regular state board meetings. Tuesday, May 21st is a work session, 9:30 a.m. If there are any topics board members would like to recommend for future meeting agendas, please notify Ms.